The time is 9:15. A very warm welcome to Downing Street, where the election race begins today. It'll be a month-long campaign leading to polling day on Thursday, May the 6th. That's not been formally confirmed, of course. It's hardly a well-kept secret, but the Prime Minister will emerge from number 10 Downing Street behind me later this morning and formally announce the date. It promises to be the most exciting, certainly, if we look at today's polls, the most unpredictable campaign for many years. Can Labour win an unprecedented fourth term? Or is David Cameron about to become the youngest Prime Minister of modern times? Yes, even younger than Tony Blair was in 1997. That contest, as I say, starts formally today. So what will we be doing for the next couple of hours? We'll be following all the events as we see the great ceremony unfolding, part of our democratic process. The Cabinet, I can tell you, already meeting in number 10, chaired by Gordon Brown. We saw Lord Mandelson, Harriet Harman, other very prominent figures in the Cabinet, including Peter Hain, arriving in the last 10 minutes. They're in there right now. That meeting should last about 45 minutes. The Prime Minister, a little later, will make the short journey to Buckingham Palace for an audience with the Queen. The purpose of that is for Mr Brown to ask Her Majesty in formal terms to dissolve Parliament, to end Parliament's business in readiness for a general election. And over at Buckingham Palace, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell monitoring events there for us. Nick, what can we expect?
Hugh, good morning from Buckingham Palace. Well, the Queen is on her way from Windsor, where she spent Easter. She is expected here at Buckingham Palace momentarily. Gordon Brown, we expect, will be here within an hour or so. He will have that audience of the Queen. It's expected to be a brief audience. She will accede, of course, to his request to dissolve Parliament, and then rather less than 3 years since he came here and was invited by the Queen to form a government as Prime Minister after Tony Blair's retirement, Gordon Brown will return to Downing Street there, and he will announce that the general election is to take place on May the 6th.
Nick, thank you very much for now. Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent at Buckingham Palace. Back with Nick a little later on. Now, after Mr Brown returns here to Downing Street, we are expecting a statement by the Prime Minister confirming the date of the election, of course, and I've no doubt spelling out some of the themes as he sees them, the big choice, as he describes it, between Labour and the Conservatives. He'll appear here in the street just outside the front door. He'll be flanked, as we understand it, by Cabinet colleagues, and together they will make that formal announcement. And during the morning we'll also be hearing, of course, from the Conservative leader David Cameron, from the Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg, from other politicians looking forward to the campaign and wanting to take advantage of this opportunity today to spell out their themes for the next few weeks. On College Green, near the Houses of Parliament, John Sopel will be talking to guests and commentators throughout the morning. John, over to you.
Hugh, thanks very much indeed. Well, the battle buses are ready, the planes have been leased, there are wearying schedules organised for all the main parties in the coming few weeks. But today we'll be getting their reaction to the fact that the campaign has finally started. Although I should say that Parliament is likely to be sitting for the rest of this week. So we're going to start an election campaign and then have things like Prime Minister's questions tomorrow and the rest of parliamentary business. Whatever happens in the next 4 weeks, Parliament will come back looking a very different place at the end of it, because so many people are standing down at this election. It should be a fascinating ride. We'll be teasing out some of the issues that they're going to be discussing here on College Green.
John, more from you a little later on. After all that has happened, and John's been talking to his guests, the party leaders are expected, as we've been hearing, to get out onto the campaign trail today to start the campaign that'll include, for the first time in British politics, 3 televised leaders' debates. Now, Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, has already been out and about this morning, and this is what he had to say just as he was looking forward to today's announcement.
I think it's great that the campaign's now going to start and people finally have got a say about the big changes they want to make this country fairer and better.
Tories stretching ahead in 2 of the polls this morning. How can you convince people that a vote for the Liberal Democrats isn't wasted?
Oh, this is a choice now between the old politics of the 2 old parties and something new, something different, which the Liberal Democrats offer. It's not a 2-horse race between the 2 old parties, Labour and the Conservatives. People have got a real choice this time, and I think that's why this election is wide open. All bets are off.
How much are you looking forward to the month ahead?
Oh, a lot. I'm really looking forward to being able to put the case for real change, for real fairness, to people up and down the country. I think people are just crying out for something different, and that's what we offer. Thanks very much.
Just a taste of the kind of contribution we'll get in the next few weeks. That's Nick Clegg, who's already on the campaign trail. David Cameron this morning started off at a very indecent hour and went for a jog, of all things, just to show that he's full of energy and ready for the fight ahead. This is what he had to say.
Well, I'm delighted it's finally underway, and this election is about a very big choice. Do we want 5 more years of Gordon Brown, or do we want change with the Conservatives who've got the energy to really get this country moving? And we have the right approach on the economy, where Labour's jobs tax would kill the recovery, and we must cut the waste in order to stop it. And we've got the right big idea for the future of our country, which is Labour's big government has failed, and it's time for the big society. That's the case we're going to make out and around the country.
Do you think the British people are excited by this, though? You talk about the great ignored. Is there not a risk that they might end up ignoring you and your fellow politicians?
Well, that's what the campaign has to be about, getting out around the country, talking and listening to people and explaining what a big choice this is, the 5 more years of Gordon Brown or real change. I think the Conservatives, the modern Conservatives, have got the energy, the leadership, the values to get things done in our country, and that's what we need, a fresh start, and that's what I offer. Thanks very much. See you on the campaign.
David Cameron leaving home this morning after the jog and after talking to journalists who were waiting for his first statement of the day, on this day that we are going to get the formal announcement of Election Day on May the 6th in a month's time. We'll be keeping an eye from the skies too, because we have the news helicopter in the skies above Whitehall and Westminster, and that's the buzz that we're hearing now and again over Downing Street. But that'll allow us anyway to track Gordon Brown's progress as he leaves Downing Street in a short while, to make the relatively short journey to Buckingham Palace for that audience with the Queen. And of course, monitoring events in his own way with us too is our political editor Nick Robinson, who's with me here in Downing Street. Nick, good to have you with us again. Well, at last it's happening.
It is, and there may be people who think, well, what's the fuss about? We already knew May the 6th in effect, although it hadn't been formally confirmed. Something real happens today, not just the formal constitutional process of asking Her Majesty to dissolve Parliament, but there are many people in that building behind us who've been working for the Prime Minister who today leave it. They are people who are what we call special advisors, party animals, and they have to hand in their mobile phones, they have to hand in their passes, and they may never return through that door again, except maybe as a guest at a party. If Labour were to lose, they now have to move to Labour headquarters, and the civil service are able to start treating the Prime Minister and ministers not as if they no longer hold those jobs, because of course they do, and if there was a national crisis they take very important decisions, but they are able to say to them, look, you're really party politicians now, you are seeking an election, and anything you want to do, we'll put through that filter. And we may say to you, actually, Minister, we recommend you don't do that just now. Wait till the people have spoken. So something real changes today.
When they talk about big choices, is that likely to translate during this campaign into very clear, distinctive policy positions? Because that's really what people are after.
It is what people are after. In a sense, we saw that harden up this week, didn't we? And interestingly, both the big parties seemed satisfied with the way it had hardened up. The Tories came out with their proposal to cut national insurance, or at least to avoid the rise that is planned by the current government for 7 out of 10 workers, and said that they could cut the deficit at the same time and protect frontline spending. The government said nonsense, you can't possibly do all of that, and are now beginning to say that they believe that the Tories will either have to have major cuts in public spending, in addition to the ones already coming, or put VAT up to 20%. So there will be a choice you will hear again and again and again, and they both seem content to be on that ground.
We'll pick up on lots of these themes later, Nick, but I must mention the debates. People are already saying, oh, you know, these debates, why are you being so obsessed about them? Because they could actually affect the campaign in a way that we don't expect.
Yes, that, and of course they're new, they are historic that they're happening, they are a big change for British politics. And yes, millions of people, we predict, we can't know of course, will look at those men and will make a judgment. Do I see these men in Downing Street? Do they look fit for office? And what the polls appear to be telling us, Hugh, in this campaign, unlike many that we've seen recently, many people have yet to make their mind up. And it could be that the debate is one of those moments where they either say, I'm willing to make the leap, I can see David Cameron on that doorstep, I will vote for him, or they say, whatever whatever I think about Gordon Brown, and we know the polls suggest many people are uncomfortable with him personally, we still see him as our Prime Minister. Or, of course, they could say, to heck with the both of them. There are other people to vote for, not just Nick Clegg who's there, but many other parties running in this contest too.
We'll be back in a second, Nick, but just a final thought on what's being said around that cabinet table right now.
He will be formally confirming to them what's going on. I suspect you'll also get the reports that you always have to have, reports about the state of the economy and about what's happening to our troops in Afghanistan. But there'll also be a moment for them to focus on the big decision for them, formally signing off Labour's manifesto. They know they've got to fight for the future. They can't merely run on the past. And one of the interesting things I'm told we'll hear from the Prime Minister on this doorstep, in addition to the predictable message on the economy, is a promise of major political reform. The talk not just of voting change, but of a referendum perhaps on House of Lords reform too. Now, if Labour got in, if they did that, it would fundamentally alter the way Britain's governed.
Nick, we'll have more later on, but for now, thank you very much. Nick Robinson there, our political editor. And Nick mentioning there the fact that obviously around that cabinet table, they are going to be formally putting the stamp on that Labour manifesto and saying, yes, we agree with it. It's a bit late to change things now anyway, but Mr Brown basically tying up a few loose ends and getting all the formal process together. And that's really what this morning is about. It is a formal process, after all, which kick-starts this election campaign. And a little later, we will see the Prime Minister's cavalcade making its way down the Mall, along the Mall, down to Buckingham Palace. It's a magnificent day, by the way, here in central London. Very sunny. And we've got a very clear view there of Horse Guards Parade, just to the right, and then of course the huge block of buildings, the Foreign Office and the Treasury, and they're tucked down just there in the shadows. We have 10 Downing Street and 11 Downing Street, and Mr Brown will be leaving in a short while. We think he'll probably leave at around 10 o'clock from the back entrance, as I understand it, although he can prove us wrong on that, and make his way to the palace and come back. But of course the big announcement will come right here in Downing Street itself. At the palace, I mentioned him a little earlier on, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell. And Nick, just a thought on the form of the meeting that will take place today, because clearly Mr Brown, no stranger to meeting the Queen and the audiences that happen weekly. What is the form of today's meeting?
Very brief, Hugh. I think, unlike the audience that he had when he came here in June 2007, when he was invited to form a government, to become Prime Minister, that you'll recall rather went on longer than we had expected, to some 45 minutes. But the meeting this morning will be brief. The Queen's not yet here at Buckingham Palace. I'm just looking, the Union flag is still flying above the palace there. There are photographers, of course, clustered around the gate for the arrival of the Prime Minister. But the audience will be a brief one, not least because the Queen needs to get back to Windsor. She has other engagements there later today. The Prime Minister will be keen to get back to Downing Street to make the formal announcement that he is calling the general election for May the 6th, and he will be keen, I'm sure, to get out on the campaign trail. So this is very much a formality. The Queen, as head of state, is the only person who can dissolve Parliament. That is it in terms of her role in just the mechanics of calling the general election. Of course, she might have a more important role come May the 7th if there is no clear winner of that election, but that is all at this stage entirely hypothetical. The focus this morning is on that journey which will shortly be made by Gordon Brown from Downing Street here to Buckingham Palace, to that audience, a brief audience at which the Queen will accede to his request for a dissolution of Parliament.
You mentioned there, Nick, the possibility of an even more important role than usual for the Sovereign on May the 7th. What kind of contacts will there have been already between the Palace and the civil service here in Whitehall about the possible arrangements in a few weeks' time?
They've gone through this in considerable detail, Hugh. They've looked at the precedents. There have been precedents in the 20th century for minority governments. They have dusted off the record books. They have looked at what has happened before now. Of course, the role of the Queen as head of state is to remain outside of politics, to remain above politics. But under the British Constitution, just as she is the only person who can grant a dissolution of Parliament, she is also the only person who can invite somebody to form a government. Now, the person that she invites wants to form a government is the person who will command the confidence of the House of Commons, who will have a majority of seats in the House of Commons. Normally it's clear-cut because normally one party has an overall majority. It becomes more complicated if no single party has an overall majority and we're into the realms of a minority government. Now, normally she would invite the person who is the sitting Prime Minister, ask him or her if they can form a government. If that person is unable to form a coalition with another party, then of course the Queen can turn to others to invite them to form a government. It's complicated also because the person to whom the Queen would normally turn for political advice is the Prime Minister. But what happens if the Prime Minister is himself no longer a neutral and disinterested person in that whole process? So in those circumstances, the Queen is able to turn to constitutional experts and others for advice. Her officials, her private secretary and others have all been going through this in considerable detail. They know what they would need to do if this eventuality arises. But that is, as I say, entirely hypothetical. It is now, or very shortly, it will be for the British electorate to decide who it will be, who on May the 7th, one assumes, will come here and be invited to form the next government.
Nick, back with you in a short while. Thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there for us at Buckingham Palace. And if you've just joined us here on BBC One and on BBC News, let me tell you it is 9:31 and we are here in Downing Street because this is the day that Gordon Brown will announce the date of the general election. We are expecting it to be May the 6th, so in precisely a month's time, but we're waiting for that formal announcement which will come a little later this morning. Let's join John Sopel, who's outside the Houses of Parliament for us.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed. And I'm joined by one of David Cameron's key people, Michael Gove, who's the party's education spokesman as well. Do you think that you are ready? Is everything geared up? Are all your arguments in place?
I think so, yes. It's been a long time waiting for this general election. Gordon Brown had the opportunity to call one in 2007, but he chose not to. He ran scared of the electorate then. Time was running out for him. Really, we had to have the election now. And we're in a strong position, I think. The argument over the course of the last week has moved decisively in our favour, and people now realise that this election will be predominantly about the economy, yes, but it will also be about who can safeguard the recovery. And my concern is that if Gordon Brown is re-elected, that he will put a tax on jobs that will kill the recovery stone dead. And that's why we've been arguing that we need to ensure that this jobs tax is stopped, and we would cut tax for 7 out of 10 working people. And I've been reassured that in the course of the last week, key business figures, people who really know how Britain works, have been arguing that we're right.
Those sort of detailed arguments are going to play themselves out over the next 4 weeks. Do you think that this is also about a more general argument about who is fit to run the country? Do you take a risk with untried, untested people like you?
Well, the real risk, actually, is carrying on with Gordon Brown and his team. It's not just the case that they're going to put the recovery at risk with this jobs tax. It's also the case that they do not have a plan to deal with the deficit. And again, if you look at all the independent figures who've been assessing how well our economy is doing, people like the Governor of the Bank of England, or people like Sir Stuart Rose of Marks and Spencer's, they've both pointed out that the real risk is a government that doesn't have a plan to bring down the level of debt, and as a result, a government that was actually risking higher mortgage rates for homeowners and higher interest rates for business. In contrast to that risk, we have in George Osborne and David Cameron a team who've got the energy, the optimism, the hope, and increasingly the support of wealth creators and people who really know about business.
But you don't worry that, you know, kind of here you are tipped to win after all these years in opposition and David Cameron will end up as the Neil Kinnock of politics?
I think that if you look at Neil Kinnock and look at David Cameron, people will see that there's a big difference between the two personalities.
Yeah, one was Eton educated, the other one wasn't. Does that matter?
No, I don't think it matters at all. I think whether you're an old Etonian or a young Aberdonian, at this election, the Conservative Party is your natural home. Of course, the Labour Party will try, as Neil Kinnock did, to play the old politics of class warfare. But Britain has moved beyond that. And I think that if you look at public sector workers, doctors, nurses, NHS support workers, there's a reason why an increasing number of them are supporting the Conservative Party, and that's because they recognise that the sorts of public services that we need in the 21st century, well-funded, yes, but also public services in which professionals have a greater degree of control over what happens, it's the Conservative Party that's making that argument, which is why we're leading among doctors and why we're seen as the party of the NHS.
You say you're the party for the 21st century. Is Chris Grayling the right person for a party of the 21st century with his attitudes towards homosexuality?
We've got a fantastic team, actually, across the board.
Answer that
Yeah,
specific
no,
question.
Chris is a great battler. He'll be a superb Home Secretary. But one thing's clear. We have ensured,
Do you agree
collectively...
do you agree with his views that he stated over the weekend about people, if you own a bed and breakfast, you ought to be able to refuse a couple that are gay if they choose to stay?
The law's quite clear, and it's a law that I voted for, and that is that you should not be able to deny people right to any service, whether it's a bed and breakfast or any other service, on the basis of their sexuality. We need to move beyond a politics which is defined either by class division or any other sort of division, and that is why at this election there will be a record number of black and minority ethnic candidates standing for the Conservative Party, and a record number of gay and lesbian candidates standing for the Conservative Party, because
So
we
just
are
to
now
be clear,
the
on that
party...
specific point, you disagree with him? You can
I
say
agree
yes
with
to
the
that.
law, and Chris has made it clear that his comments, are not to be taken as any rejection of the law that is passed. And I think it's critical that all voters, gay, straight, black, white, young, poor, old, whatever, recognise that the Conservative Party will be the party that will safeguard their economic interests by cutting their taxes, the party that will safeguard the NHS by making sure that if they or a relative have cancer, that the drugs they need will be available, and the party that will safeguard our education system by giving teachers a greater degree of control over discipline.
Just on the campaign itself, I wonder what impact you think the debates will have?
Well, it's difficult to know because they're an innovation. You chaired, I think, a number of debates where the candidates met the voters in Stourbridge, and I think the general consensus was that David Cameron came out well there. When David Cameron has a chance to meet the voters, he comes out well. This is a rather rigid format, so I suspect it will probably play to Gordon Brown's particular strengths.
OK, and I gather that, just very quickly, final question, in your rehearsals, who's playing what roles?
Oh, well, Jeremy Hunt is playing Nick Clegg, David Cameron is David Cameron, and Gordon Brown is played by Damien Green.
Right, and you?
I just help out as ever.
No, you don't. You're playing the role of either Alistair Stewart, Adam Bolton, or David Dimbleby, isn't that right?
I get to ask questions, John, but I can never ask questions as pithily or as authoritatively as you can.
Schmoozing will get you absolutely nowhere. Michael Gove, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to talk to Chris Huhne in just a moment as well here at Westminster. It's a busy day because there are going to be so many people who are going to be departing Westminster and packing up their possessions. For them, it will be their last time. Some 200 MPs are going to be standing down at the next election, which will give the next Parliament a very, very different feel to it. I should also say that even those who are standing for election and may have the safest seat in the country, they're all going to have to pack their bags, clear their desks. It's the end of term, and so there'll be a lot of farewells going on this week. As I say, I'm now joined by Chris Huhne, the party's Home Affairs spokesman, I should say, and you're one of those people in a hugely marginal constituency.
Absolutely, I think it's a great thing to actually have to fight for every single vote and make sure that you don't take your voters for granted. That's one of the big problems with this place, is there are far too many safe seats, and if you look at the MPs who got into trouble putting their fingers in the till, it was actually the ones in the safe seats were 3 times as likely to have had expenses problems as the ones in marginal seats. If we turn every single seat in this place into a marginal seat, which we'd do if we had fair votes, then you would see MPs actually having to earn every vote, and they would have a lot better House of Commons for it.
OK, so let us talk to the Liberal Democrat campaign. Here you have the Conservatives. You heard Michael Gove there talking about them being the party for the 21st century. They're the party for the health service, standing very much on centre-right. And you've got Labour standing very much on centre-left. Is there room for the Liberal Democrats?
Oh, there is very much room for the Liberal Democrats. Remember that we're going into this election at a higher level of support than we've had for decades, even higher than last time. And every single Parliament, we've had people like yourself turning around and say, well, surely that was the best you could come up with last time because of the Iraq War. Well, this is even better. And the reason this is even better is because we are the party that has the person with Vince Cable as Shadow Chancellor who is most trusted on the economy, the big issue that most people are concerned about, because actually he's got the experience and because he's been calling it right all the way through at the top in the run-up to the boom, when he was saying that we were getting into a debt-fueled boom and we needed to stop that and make sure that we didn't go into the bust. So Vince has been getting it right, the Liberal Democrats have been getting it right, and people remember that.
So your unique selling point is not Nick Clegg, who you fought for the leadership, it's Vince?
No, not at all. Nick has been
the only person you just mentioned there was Vince Cable in why you have a great chance of doing well.
Because you remembered, I mean, if I remember your question rightly, John, on, what you were talking about was the economy. And obviously Vince is our spokesman on the economy, and Vince was, of course, our spokesman on the economy before either Nick or I fought in the leadership election. He's got a long track record, and you can see that he has called it right. And everybody admits he's called it right. And if you compare that with Alistair Darling or Gordon Brown, who got us into so many of these problems, or you compare it with George Osborne, whose lack of experience, frankly, worries a lot of people in business, and you compare that with Vince's getting it right all the way through, that gives us an incredible strength in this election campaign that we haven't had in my memory.
Just for the record, my question wasn't about the economy, it was what was your unique selling point.
Well,
let me just follow on from that with the thought that at the last election you had another great unique selling point. I'm happy to congratulate you, which was on scrapping tuition fees. And that policy has now gone, and you did very well in university.
If you remember, the
cities.
unique selling point that we were talking about at the last election was the fact that both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party had got us into an illegal war in Iraq. And you, like many others, were saying, well, that's going to be a tremendously a high point. I was making the point to you that actually this time we have another advantage, which is just as significant as the advantage we had at the last election, which is that on the big issue that really matters to people, how do we nurture that recovery? We're the party that's actually been getting it right, and we're the party that can be guaranteed to speak fairly to the changes that we need. Not just any old change, changing Tweedledum, Tweedledee, the ministers in the back seat of the limousine, but a change which makes sure, for example, that nobody pays income tax on the first £10,000 of their earnings, so that low and middle income earners really benefit from the change in government, unlike the Conservatives talking about tax cuts for dead millionaires with the inheritance tax. Now that's a big contrast in values. If you want a party that's going to stand up for low and middle income earners, hard-working families, then it's Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats who are going to do that, precisely because we're putting fairness at the heart of our election message.
Let's leave it there. Thank you ever so much for being with us. An awful lot more still to come from us here on College Green. A taste of some of the arguments who I suspect we're going to be hearing rather a lot of over the next 4 weeks.
John, back with you later. Thank you to you and your guests there, Michael Gove and Chris Huhne. Here in Downing Street, well, things are beginning to happen. We saw the Cabinet gathering a short while ago, and Nick Robinson is with me, our political editor, and now we see some of the vehicles getting ready to take the Prime Minister over to the palace. We can assume he's going to come out this way.
That's right. We've got the car there, we've got the motorcade is round the corner as well. It's a short journey, but obviously the one needs to be done with the full security that we are going to see surrounding the Prime Minister. Worth remembering on a day like this how that affects elections as well. People often complain that the Prime Minister, the other party leaders don't interact properly with the public. David Cameron will now discover that he has more security from today than he's had at any other time in his life. And it means that they will have to pop in unannounced in places. Sometimes people condemn it as a kind of false photo opportunity, but that is actually what the security guys often ask them to do. Don't tell people where you're going, because then people can know about it. Just stop and decide and go. And we'll see more and more of that during this campaign.
An interesting thing to reflect on, Nick, which is that Gordon Brown could have done all this a few years ago.
Exactly. And had he done so, he, I believe, and many of his Cabinet colleagues believe, he would have had his own mandate, which he's been denied. Remember, when he comes out and calls this election, he's never done it before. He did not get into that building as a result of the people voting, but as a decision of the Labour Party itself. But he turned down that opportunity, being urged on him by many people in the autumn of 2007, just after he became Prime Minister. He got everyone, marched them up the hill, and he marched them down again. At the time, there were denials, anything happened. We now know from all the accounts behind the scenes, people were hired, salaries were paid, poster sites were booked, ready for an election, which would have massively discomforted the Tory party had he done it, but he lost his nerve at that stage. Now he's really gone to the wire. He could have not done it today, he could have done it in June, but he would have brought the ire on him of many in the Labour Party, because they would have then had to fight local elections anyway on May the 6th, and a general election a few weeks later.
Just as we enjoy the views there of central London, Nick, and some of the geography of today's events, let's just also reflect on today's opinion polls, which, to say the least, paint a rather mixed message.
They do indeed. You're getting now one newspaper with YouGov the pollster, and it's the Sun newspaper, saying the Tories are back up where they used to be, with a 10-point commanding lead, with the Tories above 40% for the first time in many months. You're getting, meanwhile, ICM in The Guardian saying, no, that lead is in fact squeezed, it's down to just 4%. The difference here between a commanding Tory majority and a hung Parliament, maybe even Labour, as the largest party in Parliament. The thing I think we have to remember again and again with these polls is no one poll is right, every poll has a margin of error, and the lead that people talk about doubles the margin of error. In other words, when you see the Tory figure, what the pollster's telling you is it's plus or minus 3%, up to, if you're interested in statistics, a 95% probability. Make that the lead, it's double that. Forget all the detail. What you have to know is don't believe every poll. Look for the trends. The trends are clear. The Tories were way ahead, it's squeezed, and then there's been some sign of it opening up again a little bit.
Well, someone who's been keeping a very close eye on the polls, I've no doubt, is the Queen. Her Majesty is on her way to Buckingham Palace right now, and she's in fact travelling, as we understand it today, by helicopter. That's a short hop from Windsor, so she's coming in for the audience with Gordon Brown, and she'll be leaving straight after it, a fairly brief meeting, and that, Nick, again, just a matter of formality, but it does really set the seal on a very troubled 5-year Parliament.
It does indeed. It's been an extraordinarily difficult period. You look back at Tony Blair when he was on this street 5 years and 1 day ago, and he talks optimistically then about securing economic stability and securing public investment. What would he have thought if, A, we'd been able to say, well, hold on, you're not going to even be there anymore. We pretty much knew that, but Tony Blair felt forced not to say it in public, annoying some. Gordon Brown may well be in the same position, telling us he's going to do a full term if he's re-elected. Few people believe that's the case. And had Tony Blair then known that we would be living through the longest, the deepest recession, according to some accounts, since the war, and with talk on all sides of cuts in public investment now, greater than made by Margaret Thatcher after the terrible recession of the early 1980s, it would have all felt very, very different indeed.
Nick, we'll be back with you in a short while, but as I say, the Queen, who's just arriving at Buckingham Palace, ready for that audience, and the Prime Minister will be leaving 10 Downing Street here at around 10 o'clock, so in just under a quarter of an hour's time, Prime Minister will be on his way. And Nick Mitchell at Buckingham Palace, what can you tell us?
Hugh, the Queen, we think, is arriving here within the next few minutes. She's come up from Windsor by helicopter. Now, I can't actually hear it at the moment. I'm now in the quadrangle within Buckingham Palace, and I can't see the flagpole from here. So a few moments ago, the Union flag was still flying. The Royal Standard, of course, will be broken out as soon as the Queen's helicopter lands here. But she will then make her way to one of the audience rooms. She's here with her private secretary. The Duke of Edinburgh has remained at Windsor, as I understand it. And she will then await the arrival of Gordon Brown sometime after 10 o'clock, we think. All the indications are, as I was saying earlier, that it will be a very brief audience. It won't take place in the Queen's private apartments, where his normal Wednesday evening prime ministerial audience takes place. That, of course, a weekly occurrence. But this morning, very much a brief meeting, a brief audience at which she will accede to the request for a dissolution of Parliament, and Gordon Brown then will return to Downing Street, as we've been reporting this morning, where he is expected to make that statement and announce that the election will take place on the 6th of May. But clearly, you know, Buckingham Palace has known for some days that this was going to happen today. They've been making the arrangements to get the Queen up from Windsor, where she's been spending Easter, and to which she will return later today. So there is the Queen's helicopter coming in from Windsor, just making its descent now into the grounds of Buckingham Palace. She left Windsor, I suppose it's can't be much more than 15-20 minutes flying time from Windsor, skirting around London Airport, of course, making a safe passage through the crowded skies around Heathrow, and now just making its final approach into Buckingham Palace. And she will then make her way first into her private apartments, and then into one of the audience rooms on the ground floor of Buckingham Palace, where she will see the Prime Minister, we think, shortly after 10 o'clock. And I can hear the helicopter just coming in now. There it is, coming in very carefully. You can see the grounds. In fact, that's probably Hyde Park that you can see in the background. Still the trees not in bud yet, but they're just making its way very slowly down. And the choice of helicopter this morning, unusual. She doesn't usually come between Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle by helicopter, but clearly this is an important occasion. Time is of the essence. She wanted to be here good and early, in time for the arrival of the Prime Minister at shortly after 10 o'clock, we think. and she will then be returning to Windsor later because she has engagements there this afternoon. But that, by now, familiar form of transport for the Queen in the royal helicopter. Yes, now rather deafening, coming in very much just a few feet there, landing in the back garden of the palace. Let's just watch as this helicopter just moves in towards the building and touches down, of course, out of our sight. Yes, well, maybe they've done that deliberately, so deny us a sight of the Queen getting out of the helicopter. But there, she's now at Buckingham Palace, and doubtless they will be now flying the Royal Standard over this building, but it will take a few moments for the Queen just to disembark from that helicopter and make her way into the palace. Ah, there we are. We can see the Royal helicopter there, and they will wait until the engine just shuts down and the rotor blades stop before anybody... there we are, and the flag, as I was mentioning, the Union flag comes down, and any second now we will see the Royal Standard being hoisted and being flown above Buckingham Palace to indicate that the Queen is in residence, very much temporarily here. She'll be here for little more than a couple of hours, I think, before she goes back to Windsor. This the 10th time that she has granted a dissolution at the request of her Prime Ministers, Gordon Brown, the 11th of the Prime Ministers of her reign. The first, of course, Winston Churchill, and going through the many decades since then. She has once been involved in a little bit of a constitutional controversy. That was the Royal Standard being broken out when Harold Macmillan decided to retire from the office of Prime Minister, and there was moves to involve the Queen in the choice of his replacement. But she's never been involved in any real difficulty in the event of a minority government. Now, that, of course, is a possibility this time, and it is conceivable that she will have to take advice from officials and from others if there is a minority government as to whom she should invite to form a government after the election on May the 6th. Now, this is all, of course, very hypothetical at this stage, but it is something, as we were discussing earlier, Hugh, that the Queen and her officials have been ensuring that they are very much up to date with the latest thinking on what the area of latitude, the area of the room for manoeuvre for the Queen is in a circumstance such as that. They will be hoping very much that this doesn't arise, that there is a clear decision by the electorate, but they are prepared for a situation in which there is a minority government, in which the Queen has to decide who to invite to form a government. Now, she is above politics, she's outside of politics, but in that circumstance she would have to take advice from people, and not necessarily from Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, because he, as I was saying earlier, would be the one person who would not, in that situation, be neutral, would not be disinterested. But that very much a matter to come, because we have 4 or more weeks now of campaigning, but in the immediate prospect, within the next hour, we expect, now that the Queen is here at Buckingham Palace, we will expect to see Gordon Brown making his way from Downing Street here to Buckingham Palace, going in to through the door just behind me there to an audience room to ask the Queen for the dissolution of this Parliament.
Nick, thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there at Buckingham Palace. As we saw, the Queen safely arrived. She's landed, come in from Windsor, ready for that audience with the Prime Minister. In Downing Street here, the Cabinet's still meeting, but once we see some of the Cabinet members emerging from Number 10, we'll know that that meeting clearly is over, and then we can expect the Prime Minister's departure, and some of the cars in the cavalcade already in Downing Street ready for that departure. So, while we wait for that, and while we wait for the Prime Minister and his colleagues to emerge, let's join John Sobel once again on the green.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed. And it's not just the MPs who live in the Palace of Westminster, it's the political journalists, the lobby journalists who live there as well. And I'm joined by Jason Beattie, the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror. And How much of a role do you think the press is going to play in this election? Less of a role this time, what with the internet, what with the debates, what with everything else?
Well, you're right, the debates are going to be crucial, but it'll be the papers which will look at the debates, they'll analyse them, and they'll give a verdict the next morning, and that will be crucial. The public will make their mind up, that they will be steered mightily by what the press say, and we will come to a decision. Now, the debate's going to be fascinating. We've got a spin room at each of these. We learnt this from the Chancellor's debate. You go into these rooms, you've got the big guns of both parties, Lord Mandelson, William Hague, Chris Huhne, you've just had on. They'll be going round as we write our copy, trying to persuade us to say, that was a good line by their player. The other side messed up a bit. You notice this, and we'll be trying to, shape opinions as we do this.
Which is what has happened in American politics for years, and it is a novelty in British politics. I mean, did anyone change what they were writing in that press room, in the spin room, as you call it, as a result of having been, strong-armed by Hague or Mandelson or whoever?
John, we like to think we're independent-minded, and we like to say, we're going to come to our own decisions, but obviously they're going to try and influence us. And, some of my colleagues will be slightly persuaded, I suspect. One side or the other, the independent newspapers, they're going to have a slightly harder job than a paper like The Mirror. We know we're backing Labour, we know where we stand.
That's an interesting point that you've made. And The Mirror has always been a Labour paper. It looks like News International has the Sun and the News of the World and the Times and the Sunday Times are coming back towards the Conservative Party after their sort of flirtation or relationship with New Labour. Do you think there'll be other surprises?
I think actually most of the papers now have actually decided where they line up behind. There's not many. The interesting question about the papers is how many of their readers actually turn out to vote. At the last election, The Sun, only 52% of our readers actually voted. The Mirror readers were actually slightly higher, and most of them did vote Labour, I have to say.
Right, and there was a correlation between the people who buy, because one of the things that's always surprised me when I've looked at these statistics is that you get newspapers which are kind of avowedly say, pro-Conservative, and then you find that an enormous number of their readers are Labour voters and have no idea of the political affiliation.
Yeah, I'd say we're slightly surprised. We have 10% of our readers do vote Tory. We're not quite sure why.
Right, and so aside from that, what are going to be the game changers in this campaign?
Well, look, the campaign, to boil it down to it's hope on the Tory side versus experience on the Labour side. You've got the Labour Party. Gordon Brown's going to come back from the palace. He's going to stand on the steps down street. He's going to have his cabinet behind him. He's going to say, we are the party of experience. Cameron is going to say, we're the party of change. Now, does change trump experience? That's a big question of the election.
Which is a question that has been posed before, and I suppose the Tories tried that in '97 when they were trying to resist the Blairite tide.
Yeah, it didn't work in '97. There was an overwhelming sway of public opinion wanting something different. It did work better in 1992. Remember, the Tories then had an election poster which was a big L, a learner driver plate. Don't let Labour in charge. It worked in '92. John Major got in by 21 seats. Is it enough for Gordon Brown this time? I don't know. We'll have to see.
Right, and so, and in the characterisation of that argument, I mean, interesting that you said that Gordon Brown is lining up with all his cabinet. If Gordon Brown thought he was the big selling point, wouldn't he just be out there by himself?
It's a difficult one. What they want to do is contrast with the Conservative lineup, because they think the Conservative team has a very weak tail, to use a critical analogy. So they've got William Hague, they've got Ken Clarke, they've got David Cameron. Osborne was a big question mark over. Is he the person you want running your economy? So he looks weak, and as you go further down the batting order, it looks very weak indeed. But then you've got Labour, and you can say, look, we've got these big guns of Mandelson, Jack Straw, Alistair Darling. They've been in cabinet for a long time. They know how it works. You can trust us. That's what they want to get across.
Yes, you use the sporting metaphor of the cricketing tail. Yesterday we had Gordon Brown and Wayne Rooney's foot. I mean, do you think people buy that sort of communication? The economy is like Wayne Rooney's foot.
It's when in an interview with The Mirror today, the Prime Minister's back on the sporting metaphors as well. He's almost throwing football chants at David Cameron. Can you trust this lot? Does it work? I think it does. It does resonate. Maybe people need to have language they understand in politics, and I think it's important. They want to get away from the horrible new Labour jargon which dominated the political scene for so long.
OK, I'm just going to carry on with the sporting metaphor. Do you think the Tories, they got 1-0 up in the first 15 minutes of play and thought, right, we'll crowd our penalty area and defend the lead and not try to score too many goals, and that's been a highly risky strategy as you look as the polls closing in as we reach, I suppose the final whistle would be the obvious metaphor.
I think the Tories had a problem. They started out with David Cameron going, let the sun shine in, we're new touchy-feely Tories. Then the polls started to close, and they went back to a bit of the old-style Tory agenda. And it's interesting, in some of the kind of marginal seats, that the Tories are still doing a lot of the old messages on immigration, Europe. There is a kind of disconnect with what David Cameron says in London and what we're actually doing in some of the regions. It's quite interesting, that.
OK, Jason, thank you very much for being with us. Let us take you back to Downing Street, where I'm sure that cabinet meeting is soon winding up. Hugh.
John, thank you very much, and welcome back to Downing Street, where it is almost 10 o'clock, and I think in a short while we'll see the Prime Minister emerge to make that formal announcement later this morning. But first, of course, he'll emerge and make the short journey to Buckingham Palace. You're watching BBC News Live in Downing Street as Mr Brown is about to leave for the Palace this morning to ask the Queen for a dissolution of Parliament. He'll then return to Downing Street here formally to announce that the election will be held on the 6th of May. Cabinet's been meeting, and within the past hour, members of Gordon Brown's cabinet arrived at Downing Street. But I think we're now in a position to see the Prime Minister emerge. Prime Minister leaving Downing Street, looking very businesslike. No words for the waiting media at the moment, because of course he's saving that big statement for later on when he returns. So he's on his way, travelling north on Whitehall, and he'll be making his way over to Buckingham Palace. Past the entrance there to Horse Guards Parade and up towards Trafalgar Square. All of this journey, of course, planned in great detail, planned meticulously, down to the minute, from the Queen's arrival that we saw a short while ago at Buckingham Palace, allowing Her Majesty just, 10 minutes or so, really, to prepare for the audience which will take place in 5 or 10 minutes' time. So the Prime Minister's car, flanked by the Outriders, that's on its way along the Mall on this lovely sunny day, the 6th of April, precisely a month before the 6th of May, when that election is expected to take place. Prime Minister's task this morning is to ask formally for a dissolution of Parliament, and that really means permission for the Houses of Parliament, both of them, the Lords and the Commons, to tie up their business, and for the process known as prorogation to take place, which is the ending of one Parliament before the next Queen's speech takes place. We expect, of course, in around June, when the next government, whichever government that is, presents its new programme of legislation to Parliament. And the Queen is there, of course, to open Parliament formally in that state opening, which happens after the election. Nicholas Witchell at Buckingham Palace.
Yes, they're at the Victoria Memorial, the Prime Minister's car with the special escort group of the Metropolitan Police just turning in now through the gates of Buckingham Palace there, where the photographers are waiting, and across the forecourt, and now it will come into my side here within the quadrangle. Here it comes, the Prime Minister now coming through the gates into the quadrangle of Buckingham Palace. It will sweep round and draw up at the King's Steps, as they're known, and instead of going into one of the audience rooms within the Queen's private apartments, he will just go into an audience room on the ground floor. That, again, I think suggests that this will be a pretty brief meeting with the Queen. There is very little business for them to do. It's simply, in terms of the mechanics of this, a question of the Prime Minister asking the Queen for a dissolution of Parliament, and she will grant that. So there, Gordon Brown just emerging, being greeted at the door by Christopher Geidt, the Queen's private secretary, and making his way into Buckingham Palace, into this audience room, and the Queen will grant the dissolution of Parliament. In terms of the formalities, then tomorrow there will be a meeting of the Privy Council. There will be a royal proclamation which has to be agreed and granted, and then the writs will be issued for each of the constituencies within the United Kingdom. Those are the formal, as it were, legal mechanics of proroguing Parliament. It will be prorogued next Monday, and of course in the days between now and then, the parties at Westminster will decide on what legislation is finally going to be passed through this wash-up period. But here, the business of the moment, inside Buckingham Palace, or there outside, you can see a few people gathering, just mostly tourists, I'm sure, wondering what's going on today. Well, the answer to that is that the Prime Minister is seeing the monarch and is asking for that dissolution of Parliament. We are into the general election of 2010. Within the next few minutes, we would expect the Prime Minister to emerge from the King's entrance there. His car has parked. You can probably just see a few yards back. No doubt it'll be 5 or 10 minutes. I'm sure they'll have a cup of coffee and just a brief discussion, but the Prime Minister will be keen to get back to Downing Street to make that statement in Downing Street, and he will, I'm sure, be keen to get out and begin campaigning along with the other party leaders, the other politicians, as this general election campaign begins.
Nick, once again, thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there, and we'll be back with Nick when that audience ends. Not quite sure when that'll be, but it won't be too long, because we're expecting the Prime Minister, as I said earlier, to be back here in Downing Street to make that announcement. Well, let's have a rough guess at about maybe 11 o'clock. We'll see when he turns up, and it's just a reflection on some of the content of that meeting today, where, of course, they will look ahead in a month's time. The Queen certainly with an eye to what might happen on May the 6th and 7th, if she has some kind of role to play in terms of who to call to form a government. That could all be very interesting, and we've not been in this position really at the start of an election campaign since 1992, though it wasn't needed then because John Major won his majority of 21. The last time the Queen was in this position really, when she was having to call someone in, was back in 1974 in February, when Edward Heath tried to form a government and failed, and then she called Harold Wilson. But the expert in all of that is with me here, Nick Robinson. Nick, just a thought now on the fact the Prime Minister left, very businesslike, and left straight away. He's gone to that audience. What is he going to be thinking on his way back before he makes this statement? What's riding on that?
Well, I think he knows that this is a moment to make a personal appeal to the British public. People will say, look, we sort of knew the date, we've heard some of the themes, isn't it all familiar? Well, no, he stands there on the steps of Downing Street for the first time in his career, saying to the British public, please keep me as your Prime Minister. He got the job, we have to keep reminding ourselves, because of internal elections in the Labour Party. In the end, there wasn't even a vote because he got so much support. And it's very different. Gordon Brown, a man who knows that the polls show that he's not personally that popular, that there are people who've got grave hesitations about him as a man, nevertheless knows that there's also been some respect built up for him by the way he handled the economic crisis, now has to reach out to the public and say, don't dispense with me, dispense with my services, now we seem to be out of the worst. He needs to make the argument to people that his skills are still needed now as the country tries to secure an economic recovery.
When we look ahead to the campaign itself, we mentioned the debates earlier, and we'll have a look in a while, Nick, at how the American debates have fashioned campaigns there. Do we expect these debates to have as big an impact on our campaign as they've had over there?
Well, in one respect, no, and in another, yes. No, because American debates have the impact they do, in part because the public often don't know the men who are running for president. Barack Obama came from nowhere because it's not a parliamentary system. People emerge as presidential hopefuls, and the debates are sometimes the first opportunity that many ordinary people have had to engage with them. Here we're familiar with our political leaders, less so, of course, of Nick Clegg, who gets this big electoral leg up by taking part in that particular process. But they may matter in a huge way for this reason. Peter Mandelson said something behind the scenes to Labour Party workers yesterday which had the ring of truth to it. He said the public are in two minds about this. On the one hand, they give some credit to the government for what it's done. On the other, they hunger for some sort of change. And the outcome of the election will depend, in many people's minds, on that balance. Do they think we can't risk what we've got by changing? Or do they say, for goodness sake, it's time we had a new lot in there? And as people battle with that in their own minds, in constituencies up and down the land, the debates may be one crucial way in which they come to that judgment.
People might be wondering today, Nick, we've seen Gordon Brown, we saw David Cameron earlier, we saw Nick Clegg earlier. What does the rest of the day hold for them? We know that Gordon Brown, after this, will probably go out campaigning, the other two as well. Any idea what's going to happen?
Yes, what we know is that they will indeed be wanting to show the sort of energy that they want to demonstrate during the campaign. They will want to demonstrate that they're getting out and meeting ordinary voters. We can't say precisely where Gordon Brown's going for security reasons, but we know he's heading to Kent. And he is likely to do the sort of campaigning that is designed to illustrate that he regards himself as the underdog, that it's not glossy and it's not expensive, that he will be popping into workplaces, he'll even be popping into people's homes, we're told, for a cup of tea, sitting on their sofa, not entirely unannounced, I assume you, but the sort of thing that's designed to get a different flavour. He hopes to portray David Cameron as the wealthy front runner for this particular contest. Mr Cameron is in the West Midlands later today, we're told, we're expecting some remarks made to a rally in the next half hour or so here in the capital. He again will be meeting voters, and Nick Clegg again is around the country speaking to voters as well. This is not just about pictures for national news looking energetic, it's not just about meeting voters, it is about touching down in as many of these places that will actually determine the election as possible to make a difference. Because the thing we too rarely remember in our business, in the national media, this isn't a national election, it's a series of local elections. People are voting for their own member of parliament, their own local representative. So being there, saying the Prime Minister, the leader of this or that party, being in your town, in your patch, does make a difference.
Nick, we'll talk a little more later on. Thank you very much. Nick Robinson there, and we'll wait then for the Prime Minister to come back to Downing Street and make that statement. In the meantime, let's join John again outside the Houses of Parliament.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed. And I'm joined by a rather controversial figure around Westminster, Charlie Whelan, who is the political director of the Unite Union, but also used to be Gordon Brown's spokesman for many, many years. Charlie Whelan, good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us. So what role are you playing in this election campaign?
Well, I have an office down the road at the Unite headquarters, and we've been working very hard in the key seats, in the marginal seats that are going to be so crucial in this election, talking to tens of thousands of Unite members and trying to persuade them to vote Labour.
And this is the counterpoint to the Ashcroft operation, isn't it, if you like?
Well, not really, because Lord Ashcroft, as you know, doesn't pay tax in this country, gives millions of pounds to the Conservative Party.
He does it on his UK earnings. He does pay tax on
But he doesn't pay tax on any of his other earnings. He's given millions of pounds to the Conservative Party. Trade unions, of course, have a tiny proportion of their dues they give to the Labour Party and help to elect a Labour government.
So how much has Unite given the Labour Party over the past 5 years?
Well, I don't know the exact figure, John, but I should think it would be about £10 million.
So you're not an insignificant... I just wanted to make the point. You're not an insignificant donor towards the Labour Party.
No, not at all. And we're proud of it. And it's all open and above board. And as you say, every single Unite member pays tax in this country.
Yes. And do you think that that's a good thing for Labour to be kind of advertising that link when we've just seen, the strikes at British Airways and the disruption that's caused to people's holiday plans?
Well, I think what people are really concerned about in this election is the economy and whether or not they've got a job, and they'll be able to compare Gordon Brown, a man of substance who's leading us out of recession, to David Cameron, who is just all PR and has got no experience whatsoever. So that's what people are really interested in, John.
But equally, then look at what happened last week with that letter that was sent to the Daily Telegraph by all those captains of industry. They're not the sort of people who normally break cover.
No, but these people, of course, they don't want to
and
pay...
they were supporting the Conservative Party's policies on national insurance.
Of course, John, of course these people don't want to pay tax. And as you know, national insurance is a much fairer tax because if you're poor, you pay much less. And if you're a pensioner, you don't pay it at all, as opposed to VAT, which the Tories like to raise, which is unfair on poor people and pensioners. And therefore, there is the contrast between a Labour government hasn't raised VAT through its whole period in office, and a Tory government that always does raise VAT, and a fairer tax, which national insurance.
So you're saying, hang on, you're saying that the head of M&S, the head
no,
of
I didn't say that.
No,
I never said that. Don't put words into my mouth, John. I said that.
You said they're doing it because they don't like to pay tax.
Don't point at me,
no,
John.
That's what you said.
I said national insurance was a fairer tax, and VAT is a fairer tax for poor people. That's what I said. And VAT is a tax that hits poorer people harder. So I was saying, at this election, John, you're going to have a choice. You're going to have a choice between a Labour government with fair tax and a Tory government. You know, the Tories got proposals to cut tax for the top 3,000 people in this country. Is that fair, John?
The Tories have said that what they want, they've got no plans to increase VAT.
But they said that at every election. They've always.
But it's no different from what Alistair Darling has said.
When did Labour raise VAT in all the years they've been in office? They haven't raised VAT at all, John. It's the Tory party that always raised VAT.
Well,
every single. I mean, I'm old enough to remember.
Okay, if you want to trade election pledges, Labour Party went into the election in 2005 pledging that they would not raise the top rate of tax. Today, April the 6th, the top rate of tax has gone up to 50%.
Well, I think that's very good. I'm glad you raised that because there is a fair tax. We're raising the top rate of tax.
So then pledges don't count for anything.
For the very people at the top, as opposed to the Tories who want to cut tax for the top 3,000.
You've just changed the grounds of the argument.
Well, of course I'm changing the grounds of the argument. You've just made a point for me. It's fair tax against unfair tax, and people will have a choice in this election, John.
But there's a question of trust as well about politics, isn't there? And if you go into an election pledging that you're not going to raise the top rate of tax, and you do raise the top rate of tax, which is what this government has done, then that is, whether it's just or it's a fair tax or it's not a fair tax, leave that argument to one side. It's a broken promise.
No, I think what's really important is what you do in a recession. I mean, all sorts of things happen in terms of a government that you couldn't have counted for. And of course, this is what's happened. We've had a recession and we've had to raise money from tax. And of course, the way the Labour government has raised money from tax is through a much fairer way. So you might have to pay a little more now, John, because I'm sure you'll be on the top rate of tax. You might have to pay a little more, but people down the bottom won't.
OK, Charlie Whelan, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Well, let's have a look at the three latest opinion polls that have been released today. A YouGov poll for the Sun newspaper has the Conservatives on a 10-point lead. They're on 41% to 31%. The Liberal Democrats are on 18%. Now, a poll by Opinion for the Daily Express also has the Tories on a 10-point lead. They've got 39%, Labour 29%, Liberal Democrats on 17%, while today's ICM poll in The Guardian shows a much smaller lead for the Conservatives. They're 4 points up, with 37% compared to 33% for Labour and 21% for the Liberal Democrats. Well, we can speak now to Simon Hoggart, political sketch writer for The Guardian, and to Andrew Hawkins from Comrades. Both of you, thank you very much indeed. Andrew, let me come to you first. What should we make of where the polls are at the moment?
I think the thing to do is not to look at any one individual poll, but to look at the monthly averages. And what that tells us is that until the end of January, the Conservatives had a double-digit lead. Since then, they've been in single figures, but over the last couple of weeks, that lead has been gradually creeping up. And the average at the moment is around about 7 or 8 percentage points. So it's on a knife edge. But I think when you take into account regional variations in voting behaviour and in the Conservatives' lead, in particular in places like London and the South East and some key parts of the Midlands, that actually they're not in a bad position at all.
And Simon Hoggart, I was talking a moment ago to Charlie Whelan about the sort of, the campaign for the marginals. Do you get big, vast differences between how marginal constituencies vote, or is it just the country as a whole?
No, the interesting thing is that recently we've seen that in spite of all Lord Ashcroft's millions being poured into marginal Labour seats, it hasn't done them very much good. The Tory lead is only very, very slightly higher in the marginals than it is in the rest of the country. What's going to be more important, I think, is an election like this, when clearly the electorate hasn't made up its mind in a way that
from 1997, for example, it clearly had. There could be a tipping point, and it might be just one small factor, like, for example, 1970, Ted Heath, miners on strike. Suddenly an independent report came out saying the miners were underpaid, and you could see the support slipping away from Heath. Again, 74, that was 74. 1970, Harold Wilson looked as if he was cruising to victory, but then the balance of payments crisis came upon us, and that seemed to matter tremendously. We could have a situation, end of this month, out comes the National Statistics Office showing that, in fact, we're slipping back into recession, or that we've leapt clear. Those are going to be fantastically important figures when they come out.
Yes, Andrew, I'm sure you have all this polling history at your fingertips. Do polls change a huge amount during an election campaign? Or is it kind of like the great adverts for, I don't know, for soap powder, where what you're trying to do is you're spending millions on advertising, not because your sales are going to suddenly grow up massively, you're just trying to defend your market share?
Yeah, there's an old saying that you can't fatten a pig on market day, and the Conservatives have only got 4 weeks to pull themselves sufficiently clear of Labour. And history shows us that the polls do converge a little bit in the final weeks. I mean, they grow closer to each other, and they need to do that, because when you look back at the polls between now and the beginning of last month, the variance among online pollsters goes from 2% Conservative lead up to 13%, and for the more traditional telephone pollsters, it's half of that variation. So not only are the party leaders going to be pretty nervous come 7th of May, I think there'll be some pollsters who'll be pretty nervous as well, because 1 or 2 percentage points either way could have a colossal impact on the outcome, on the number of seats that the party gets.
And Simon, just on a kind of a factual point, you were talking about 1974. Now then, when we got the hung parliament, the Liberal Party under Jeremy Thorpe they only had 14 seats. The total number of seats held by other parties was maybe 40 or 50. Now it's something like 100 seats held by all other players, and therefore presumably that just statistically means there is a much greater chance that no one party gets an overall majority.
Well, quite, yes, and everybody says, the Liberals are down to 18 or 19%. The fact is that people don't vote Liberal Democrat where there's little chance of them winning. They do vote Liberal Democrat where if the Liberal Democrats can persuade the voters that they have a really good chance of winning in that seat. So forget the Liberal Democrat figures. They might have even more seats now in a month's time than they do now. And that would put Clegg in a terrible position, because Liberal Democrats hate the Tories, but they certainly don't want to return to Gordon Brown and the events of the last 13 years. So you really will be in a pickle, I think, and may well have just to say, look, we'll take this vote-by-vote basis and wait till whoever comes out with most seats calls another election later in the year.
And Andrew, the other thing that we've been hearing about is the undecided voters. Are there unusually high numbers of undecided voters this time, or is this statistically roughly what we expect?
Well, it's undecideds and people who are not decided about whether they're going to vote at all. When you look at the corresponding figures before the 2005 election, which of course had the lowest turnout since second lowest turnout since the First World War, the proportion of people who said they were certain to vote before that election were quite a bit higher than the proportion who say they're certain to vote now. So I think it could play out either way. On one hand, people's disdain for the whole political class could mean that people decide that they don't want anything to do with politicians and will stay at home. On the other hand, the fact that it's a very closely fought election could mean that people feel their vote's really going to count.
And just another point, Simon, I remember in the sort of 92 election, I think it was, when David Amess won Basildon, and you suddenly sense, well, this was going to be a very big Conservative, it was going to be a Conservative victory when people had been thinking before that, up until election night, that Neil Kinnock might win. Do you think there could be a similar moment, or are we going to see very differential swings, where maybe Labour are piling up votes in Scotland but losing seats in the south, and and it'll just be a very odd picture?
It could be much more regional, yes, and that will depend on where the recession has hit most badly, most greatest difficulty. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's really going to be, it could be a tipping point election. Remember, very good example, 92, we thought that Neil Kinnock was probably going to win because the polls said so. Then there was a Sheffield rally. It looked vainglorious. Stupid. You thought, do we want to trust our future to someone who behaves like a rock star when the lights are on him? Very, very damaging. Again, tipping point. It could well be one of those in which we see suddenly the polls all shooting in one direction quite late on in the campaign.
Yes, I saw you nodding there, Andrew.
I think for 92 is a very interesting example as well, because the assumption that Labour were going to win was predicated on an expected turnout that was lower than we saw on the day, and the fact that it was pretty close, the fact that we had that the Sheffield moment, actually brought people out during that final week that they decided, actually, I'm going to vote and this is the way I'm going to do it. Turnout then just shy, I think, of 78%, much, much higher than we've seen in the last 2 elections.
Yes, and I mean, an interesting stat there is that John Major's popular vote in that election was absolutely huge compared to, Tony Blair in 2005, which was much, much lower.
That's right, and the thing that we don't know at this stage is the impact of the expenses crisis. And it's interesting that a lot of the newspapers today in their coverage of the general election talk about the economy as the most important issue. In many respects it is, but I've just been taken aback at the scale of contempt that exists among voters for the entire political class. And the way that plays out, I think, will probably be principally to Labour's disadvantage, but all the main parties are going to be hit, and it presents a dilemma for Nick Clegg. Does he want to be seen as one of the big 3, or does he want to distance himself from this evil group of people called politicians?
So, interestingly, I'm sure you're not going to tell me who's going to win the election, who's going to lose the election, but would you make this prediction that turnout will be even lower?
Well, if it's seen as a very close contest, that could have the opposite effect. And the political parties have got these 2 challenges. The first is to persuade people to vote at all, and secondly, to persuade people that they're the right people to run the country. And in light of that, I'm nervous about turnout. I'm nervous that it could be lower than last time.
What's your feeling? I know you're not...
If Esther Ransom wins in Luton, we'll know there's been a political revolution in this country.
Do you think that we could see things like that? We could see some surprise results?
There's been some, yes. A lot of Labour candidates have been foisted on the local party, as happened in South Wales, as happened just now in Stoke-on-Trent. People like Dr Taylor in Kidderminster, he's won 3 elections now on the basis of keeping the local hospital open, even though it's closed. So what do you think?
OK, well, fascinating. Thank you both very much indeed for a quick guide of what the polls may have in store for us. Hugh, back to you.
John, thanks very much. Well, if you're just joining us here on BBC One and on the BBC News channel, let me tell you what's going on. It is the day that Gordon Brown announces that he's calling an election for May the 6th. He's not made that announcement yet. He's at the moment meeting Her Majesty the Queen at Buckingham Palace. That audience, as we understand it, still taking place. We'll see the Prime Minister leaving when that's all over, and he'll make his way back here to Downing Street, where we expect him to emerge. We're not quite sure when, by the way, but it'll be within the next hour or so, to emerge with his cabinet colleagues and make the formal announcement. But the audience at Buckingham Palace still going on. The Prime Minister left Downing Street at 10 o'clock, pretty much precisely, and went over there just in a few minutes. So the audience started, we think, at around 10:10. And we'll be back with Nicholas Witchell in a second, who's at Buckingham Palace for us. But before that, let's just underline the fact that the campaigning has clearly already started. David Cameron will be speaking in a short while. Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, has already been making 2 statements today. This is the second of them.
I think this is a huge, huge election. I mean, it's certainly the beginning of the end for Brown, that's for sure. But I think he is directly and personally responsible for so many of the things that have gone wrong in the last 13 years. The illegal invasion of Iraq that only we stood up against. The unfairness and inequality in Britain that we've been campaigning against through our policies of a fair tax switch in Britain. The rottenness and corruption in Parliament that we've been speaking about long before the other parties ever realised there was a problem. And also the unfairness in Britain in so many other ways. The fact that children don't have a chance to get ahead. That's why our policy of smaller class sizes, more one-to-one tuition. The banks. Brown's utter failure to stop the greed in the banks, which have now created this recession, which have hit so many people so hard. Remember, Vince Cable standing alone in the House of Commons saying this can't go on, and neither the Conservatives.
That was Nick Clegg. Let's go straight to Buckingham Palace, where the Prime Minister's leaving. Nick Witchell is there.
There is the Prime Minister, looking content and happy, smile on his face, coming out. We make it 23 minutes after he went in to what we thought was going to be a short audience. Well, time for 2 cups of coffee, perhaps. But there the Prime Minister, having sought and obtained the dissolution of Parliament, now leaving Buckingham Palace to make his way back to Downing Street, smiling in the back there with one of his private secretaries, making his way out past our little group in the corner here, through the archway into the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. Crowds there. It must be said that those crowds more probably here to watch the changing of the guard ceremony later than to see Gordon Brown at Buckingham Palace. But there, as the Prime Minister's vehicle goes through the outer gates of the palace, past the photographers and on down the Mall, no doubt, to Downing Street. Gordon Brown, of course, now to face his first general election as Prime Minister, this general election of 2010. And as we see the Prime Minister's motorcade making its way down the Mall towards Downing Street, let's go back to Hugh, who is in, of course, in Downing Street.
The Prime Minister on his way back to Downing Street, and I think he'll rejoin his cabinet colleagues inside number 10 for a few minutes, and then they'll prepare the statement that that he's to make, really, but they'll be there to give their support as this election campaign gets underway. But the cavalcade now well on its way back along the Mall, and it really does just take a few minutes. And let's not forget, of course, that the traffic is, well, how can I put it, manipulated so that the Prime Minister can make a rapid and problem-free journey from the palace back to Downing Street itself. Cabinet meeting started this morning at 9:15 and lasted about 40 minutes. And we may get a little more about the nature of that meeting a little later on. But certainly they formally approved Labour's manifesto, and we'll get a taste of the headlines of that manifesto when Mr. Brown emerges. So the Prime Minister's car. Turning along Horse Guards Parade, I think. Making its way past the Treasury. And, yes, that's right, up along Horse Guards Avenue. And turning onto Horse Guards Parade itself. Just the driveway next to it, which is the rear entrance to Downing Street. So a different way back to the way there. Nick Robinson, our political editor, with me. And Nick, they've gone back the other way, but we expect them to emerge this way later on.
That's right. I think he's going in the back entrance of Downing Street. He will meet again with his cabinet, and then they will come out for the formal announcement here on the steps. It would look slightly curious if he came before the world's media and all the cameras said hi and went straight through the front door.
Certainly would. But I think the point earlier on was the departure earlier is a bit of the formality of the day, really. The formal departure to go and see the Queen, that's a natural thing to do here. But now we're preparing for the showpiece event.
That's right. He's going in to have a last opportunity to meet to the cabinet and prepare himself here, because he is, for the first time, going to emerge from those steps and say to the public, say to the electorate, pick me, back me. I want you to give me your support to stay on for an extraordinary thing, really. He would be asking for a historic fourth Labour term, he'd be asking for an extension of the 13 years Labour have been in office, and he would be asking for a confirmation of a quite amazing political comeback were it to happen. A man who's been deep down in the polls, who there have been active efforts to remove him, not once but several times, and he would be saying to the public, no, confirm me as your Prime Minister.
We look ahead to the campaign and the kind of energy levels needed by these leaders. And David Cameron, as we were saying, would be a very young Prime Minister if he made it to number 10. Nick Clegg, a young leader too. Gordon Brown's always been seen as, in recent years, as somebody who's been exhausted, someone who's been battling and someone who's been dogged. Will there be efforts during the campaign to make him look much more energetic?
Well, we saw this yesterday morning. We saw him jogging around the park. Now, I don't think that was done for the cameras. He has taken up jogging. There was a real effort after a period in which he looked haggard on screen. There was a real effort by his friends, by his wife to say, come on, you need breaks, you need energy, you need to look after your diet and your exercise.
Nick, I'm going to ask you to pause for a second because David Cameron's about to speak at a party event. Let's join that.
Hi, hello, hi, good to see you. Very good to see you. Hi, how are you? Hi, good morning. Good morning. Very good morning. Hi, George, how are you? Good to see you. Our candidate in Camden. Hi, how are you? Not far from home. Hi, Sean, how are you? Very good to see you. where's Helen? We've lost her. Helen. There we are. You have met her. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for coming together today. Let me tell you what I think this election is all about. It's about the future of our economy. It's about the future of our society. It's about the future of our country. It's the most important general election for a generation. And it comes down to this. You don't have to put up with another 5 years of Gordon Brown. There is today a modern conservative alternative that has got the leadership, that's got the energy, that's got the values to get this country moving. And if you vote Conservative, you are voting for hope, you're voting for optimism, you're voting for change, you're voting for the fresh start this country, our country, so badly needs. And don't let anybody tell you that there is no real choice at this election. There is a real choice. It's not just 5 more years of Gordon Brown or real change with the Conservatives. When it comes to our economy, there is a real choice. There is the Labour way of more debt and more taxes and more waste, or there is the Conservative way of saying no. We've got to stop that waste, to stop Labour's job tax, which would wreck our recovery. And look what's happened in the last few weeks. Leaders of some of Britain's biggest and most successful businesses saying that when it comes to getting our recovery going, it is the Conservatives that got it right and it's Labour who've got it wrong. Think of what Labour are saying to people in this country. They're saying we want to go on wasting your money and then we're going to put up your taxes. We say no. Every family in our country has had to make savings. Every business in our country has had to make savings. Why should government be any different? And there is real choice when it comes to the future of our society. We've had 13 years of Labour's big government and it's making our social problems worse. After 13 years, inequality is worse. The poorest have got poorer. There are still too many failing schools. We say it's time for change, it's time for the big society that we offer. Let's say to those charities and social enterprises that have got great ideas to tackle poverty, go ahead and do it. Let's say to people who have a passion for education that you can start up that great school and give our children a better chance. Let's say to that young man on welfare, we will help you, we will give you training, but if you don't take the job on offer, you cannot go on with a life on benefits. And there's a big choice when it comes to the future of our public services. There is the Labour way. More bureaucracy, more paperwork, more processes, endless targets. Or there's the modern Conservative alternative, saying to those teachers, those doctors, those nurses, you have a love of what you do, you have a vocation. We want to set you free to do the job you love and to serve the people you want to care for. There are real choices at this election. And don't let anybody tell you that real change cannot happen from this election. If we win this election, there will be real change. I want to tell you who I'm fighting this election for. It's the people I call the great ignored. They may be black or white, they may be rich or poor, they may live in the town or the country. They work hard, they set up businesses, they work in factories, they teach our children, they keep our streets safe, they obey the law, they pay the taxes, they do the right thing. They're the honest, hard-working people of our country, and they're desperate to know that in this great country we can still achieve great things. And let this campaign be about inspiring them again that real change can take place. Let's think of the mother who wants a good school for her child but the system won't provide it, and let's win it for her. Let's think of the business that's got a great idea but is held back by Labour's red tape and taxes. Let's think of the social enterprise that's got a great idea for tackling poverty but the system and the bureaucracy won't let it. Let's think of the pensioner who doesn't want handouts but who wants dignity and security in old age and wants to leave his home to his children and his grandchildren, not have to sell it to pay for his care. And let's win it for all of them. Let's think of the soldiers returning to our country
who want to know not just that society cares about them, but their government will always look after them, and let's win it for all of them. I know there can be real change if we win this election, because our plans are going to be exciting, our plans are going to be radical. Not just a new set of policies, not just a new set of politicians, but a whole different way of doing things in our country. Because let's be frank about this. Look at our economy. We've had the biggest boom and bust for a generation, and we need a whole new economic model. Look at the problems in our society. We don't just need a lick of paint, we need a whole big change. Not just asking, what can government do for me, but what can we all do together to make our society stronger? And look at the mess of our political system. It's not just the shame and the mess and the shambles of expenses. It's the whole top-down, I know best, do as you're told, take what you're given and just put up with it system that has to change. We know that this should be about people power. We know that politicians should be accountable to people, answerable to people, and not the other way round. So if we get in, we're going to shake things up. We're going to cut the size of the House of Commons. We're going to get rid of the ID cards. We're going to get rid of the regional nonsense. We're going to cut ministers' pay and freeze it. We're going to cut the bureaucracy that's got so out of control and make people feel proud again about that building over there, thinking, yes, it is my parliament. It's my government. It answers for me and not the other way round. That's the change that we're going to bring. And don't let anyone say we just have to put up with what we've got. We know what Labour will say. Stick with the devil you know. Don't risk change. The other lot won't be any better. Frankly, we couldn't be any worse. But don't think like that. Where is it written that we have to put up with more debt, more taxes and more waste? Where is it written that we can't deal with the problems of antisocial behaviour and crime and violence on our streets on a Friday and Saturday night? Where is it written that we can't have the best state schools in the whole world? We're one of the richest countries in the world and we deserve better. We must be saying to people, don't just put up with what you've got. Don't just ask for better from your politicians. Demand that you get better. That is what we offer at this election. So as we go out on this campaign trail, I want everybody to say to the people of this country that there is a modern conservative alternative that's about voting for hope, voting for optimism, voting for change. This country deserves so much better than 5 more years of Gordon Brown, and that is what we must offer. So let's get out there and say, let us get off this road to ruin and instead get on the path to prosperity and progress. Let's fight for what we believe in. Let us take a case to the country, to the people of this country, about hope, optimism and change. And let's win this election for the good of the country that we love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Conservative leader David Cameron addressing supporters there just on the south bank of the River Thames. We can see the Houses of Parliament just opposite. They're standing in front of the old County Hall there. Now, Ben Brown, our correspondent, is there. And Ben, we may have to come straight back to Downing Street if the Prime Minister emerges, but just give us your impressions there.
Well, David Cameron there kicking off his campaign. It's a busy first day for him. He's starting here at County Hall, talking there to the party faithful, 200 or 300 of the Conservative Party activists who've been invited here for this launch. From here, he's going on to Birmingham and to Leeds, but really putting a lot of energy into this first day of his campaign. And his message there, really, that this is going to be the most important general election, he said, for a generation. His message, and this got a huge cheer from the activists behind me, you don't have to put up with another 5 years of Gordon Brown. He said the people should vote for hope, for optimism, vote for change and a fresh start. And really in an echo of John F. Kennedy, he said, don't ask what your government can do for you, what can we all do to make society stronger? That was David Cameron's message here this morning.
Ben will be back with you later on. Thank you very much, Ben Brown there, who's monitoring events at that David Cameron event, just, literally half a mile away across the River Thames. And Nick Robinson is with me here, our political editor. Nick, we're expecting the Prime Minister to emerge, really, with Cabinet colleagues any second, so we'll wait for that to happen. Just wondering what you made of the David Cameron speech.
Well, intriguing already how all the party leaders want to look like they're not part of the Westminster Village. So he chose a backdrop deliberately so he could point out there, didn't he? Point at the House of Commons as if he is with the people against the House of Commons. And I think when Gordon Brown gives his speech in this formal atmosphere, he will then dash off, we're told, into Kent, and we'll see him in workplaces, we'll see him in people's homes, designed to do exactly that, to say, I'm with you, not with them. Because part of what we know this election kicks off is a process where the public have to kind of filter their anger with politicians as a whole, with Parliament as a whole, about the expenses scandal, lobbying and all the rest. Big decision for many people. Do they vote? Do they vote as they always have? Do they punish individual MPs? What do they do to reflect the frustration they felt about the way politicians have behaved?
Did the David Cameron words there tell us something new about the kind of campaign he's going to run?
Simply that he is not going to allow Gordon Brown to run as the underdog. The Tories can see this coming. They know that the Labour Party want to present the Prime Minister as being the underdog, as fighting against the rich guy, not just personally, but also the rich and successful party that has assumed that it's going to get office. David Cameron clearly, by that image, is not going to let him do that easily.
Now, when we get the Prime Minister emerging here, what should we be looking out for? What are the key things in the message that we'll be wanting to focus on?
The key thing we want to hear from him is how he frames the debate. Now, we've been given a little sense of that already. We've been told that he will say that after such hard work to get through the recession, that no one will likely throw that away when the country is now trying to fight for economic recovery. I think the economy will be a central message. But we've also been told that that will be one of several themes that he has. 3. Economic recovery, 1. Secondly is how to protect public services, he will argue, at the same time as cutting the budget deficit in half over 4 years. And 3rd, and probably newest of all, will be about political renewal. Exactly the message David Cameron was implying there when he talked about changing Parliament, where we will get more, not today I suspect, Hugh, but we're going to hint today of the fact that he wants to run as a radical reformer, shaking up the nature of politics, the voting system, the House of Lords and so on, not just what politicians themselves do.
He'll be flanked today, if indeed those cabinet ministers come out with him, by some people who, privately at least, have expressed quite a few doubts about his leadership in the past few years. Will there be any questions today about the concept of unity? Well, let's wait, Nick, because here they're emerging, led by some of the cabinet ministers, and let's wait for that announcement. Jack Straw, the Justice Minister, Tessa Jowell, and I can see Yvette Cooper, Baroness Royal, the Leader of the Lords. So the entire cabinet lining the pavement outside number 10 Downing Street and waiting for the Prime Minister himself to emerge, the Miliband brothers, and Lord Mandelson there, waiting for the announcement to be made. Alan Johnson, the Home Secretary, just the nearest Minister to the policeman there, and on the other side we can see the door opening and the Prime Minister emerging.
It will come as no surprise to all of you, and it's probably the least well-kept secret of recent years, but the Queen has kindly agreed to the dissolution of Parliament, and a general election will take place on May the 6th. I come from an ordinary middle-class family in an ordinary town, And I know where I come from, and I will never forget the values, doing the right thing, doing your duty, taking responsibility, telling the truth, working hard, that my parents instilled in me. And over these last few months, this government at every time has fought hard, facing the biggest world recession, to fight on behalf of hard-working families on middle and modest incomes. And over the next few weeks, I will go around the country, the length and breadth of our land, and I will take to people a very straightforward and clear message. Britain is on the road to recovery, and nothing we do should put that recovery at risk. There will be many big challenges and many big decisions to make over the next few months, upon which our future success depends. Get the big decisions right, as we did in the last 18 months facing world recession, and jobs, prosperity, and better standards of living will result. Get the big decisions wrong, and the lives of hundreds of thousands of people are diminished as a result. Our economy is now moving forward, but to withdraw billions of pounds from the economy will put recovery at risk. Unemployment has now been falling, but a government that doesn't care to implement our plans to help the unemployed will see unemployment rise faster again. Small businesses are starting to grow, but a double-dip recession would hit thousands of them. That is why I'm asking the British people, I'm asking you, the British people, for a clear and straightforward mandate to continue the urgent and hard work of securing the recovery, building our industries for the future, and creating 1 million skilled jobs over the next 5 years. And I'm asking the British people also for a mandate that as we cut the deficit by half over 4 years, through fair taxes and reductions in public expenditure, that we will maintain and improve our frontline public services, our police, our schools, and our hospitals. And I want to give a direct guarantee to every single citizen of Britain that when you need the police, when you need help with cancer care, when you need your GP at the evenings or at weekends, when you need as a child to have personal tuition in your school, then these public services will be there directly guaranteed to you as an individual citizen when you need them and accountable to you and your family. And we will not allow 13 years of investment and reform in our public services to build up the future of these great services to be put at risk. During these next few weeks, we will keep in our minds and hearts the work of courage that is being done by our soldiers and our armed forces in Afghanistan. And we will support them in every way in the fight that they are taking to terrorism that is still a threat to our land. But I have one final mandate to ask of the British people as well. It is a mandate to improve public trust in our democracy and in our public life. Politics has been scarred by recent events. In the next few days, I will put forward a comprehensive plan so that the people of this country can be sure that there is transparent, accountable, open and democratic politics being pursued in our country at every stage, accountable to them in the future. And I want us to renew the contract between the people and those who they are sworn to serve. I am not a team of one. As everybody can see, I'm one of a team with energy, with substance, and with ideas to lead this amazing country in a second decade of a still new century. We will fight for fairness at all times. We will say to the British people, our cause is your cause. The future is within our grasp. It is a future fair for all. Now, all of us, let's go to it. Thank you very much.
Let's go to it as they all mellow crescent.
Prime Minister
I'm not going to answer any of those at all.
issues this challenge, really, to go to it and to start the work of campaigning.
In our democracy.
and really appealed to the voters of Britain, 45 million of them, for a mandate in several forms. A mandate not just to clean up politics, but a mandate to carry on with the work that he is doing on the economy, though of course the other parties will dispute the value of some of that work. Our political editor Nick Robinson with me. We were just listening to every word of that, and what did we make of that, Nick?
Well, striking, though not surprising, that at the heart of that plea for a mandate was the appeal to keep the economy recovering and not, as he would argue, to put it at threat. But also, as I was saying just before he came out, a hint, a promise of a comprehensive package of what he calls political renewal. I think we're talking about changes to the voting system, we're talking about the reform of the House of Lords, long talked of, way more than 100 years, that he is now promising. And also striking who he chose to come out with. I remember standing on this street not very long ago, being told by a very senior figure indeed, forgive me, I'm not going to tell you who it was, saying Alistair Darling's gone. He will not be Chancellor. But who emerged from that door? At his side, Alistair Darling and his deputy, Harriet Harman, because what he wants to say to the British public is, when it comes to the economy, we, he is saying now, got the big decisions right. They, he's implying, David Cameron and George Osborne did not.
I think we should just underline, I mean, certainly for the viewers and for everyone else, Nick, that we do have the date now. It's formally confirmed. We were talking about it in very certain terms before, but it will now be on May the 6th, and it lines the country up for a month's campaign.
That's right, and it means we get underway. Things are different. Yes, of course, we've had news conferences and poster launches, but we are about to see a change. Many staff will leave this building now. People who work for the Labour Party lose their passes, lose their phones. They have to now go to Labour HQ. Ministers will leave their offices, go to their constituencies to campaign. There'll be 1 or 2 days left in the House of Commons to get the last bit of business done. Then that will effectively close down. And the action will move into the country. Because for Gordon Brown to stand on that step again as Prime Minister and secure it, he needs votes now. He knows he no longer can do it thanks to the support of his party or any deals internally. He now needs electoral support. Democracy has got underway again.
Just one little question, because someone on the website was asking this, Nick. Someone asking, does government shut down entirely for the next month? It kind of carries on in a skeleton function, does it?
That's exactly right. The Prime Minister stays the Prime Minister. The ministers stay ministers. So were there, God help us, a national crisis, terrorism, was there an economic crisis, they would still turn to Gordon Brown or Alistair Darling and the relevant ministers. They would still have power. The difference, though, is day-to-day decisions they're not expected to take. And actually, some of those people in the House of Lords, Peter Mandelson, Lord Adonis, they are not now seeking election themselves. They would have more time. And the civil service are now able to say to the politicians, we'll only put in front of you decisions that have to be taken for the good of the country. And if you come to us with anything that we think is designed to make a partisan or a political party point, then I'm afraid, Minister, we're going to say no, Minister.
Nick, we'll talk a little more later on about the kind of campaign we can expect. But for now, thank you very much. And if you've just joined us here on BBC News and BBC One on the news channel, let me just confirm, therefore, that the Prime Minister has emerged from number 10 Downing Street. Gordon Brown has announced the date of the election. It is May the 6th, and the Queen has already agreed to the dissolution of Parliament. That's the news that we have, and with that I'm going to join John Sopel on the green.
Hugh, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, can I just describe a little picture to you of how it unfolded as when Gordon Brown was making that statement? We put it on a loudspeaker on College Green, and all sorts of people suddenly started gathering round, senior union people, a couple of peers, anyone who was passing, because they wanted to hear that statement. And we're going to deconstruct it now with Kevin Maguire from the Daily Mirror and Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator. What did you make of the address that we heard from Gordon Brown there? Kind of very interesting, I thought, the themes that came out of it.
Yes, he basically laid down the terms of his election campaign. He's saying that I am an ordinary man from an ordinary background. He's not, of course, but that's one of the messages he wants to give out. That there's going to be, there's an urgency for change. I've got an agenda, so please don't interrupt this agenda if you value the economic recovery. And the other values which he wants to present as being core to himself and Labour. And of course, he's one of a team. You saw that almost chorus effect he had of cabinet members standing outside. The first time I can remember a Prime Minister doing that on election day. but he wants to give a message that he may be unpopular, and he is, but there's all these other guys as well. So it's not just a question of voting for Gordon Brown, which is how David Cameron would frame it, but voting for the Labour government. So I think he wants to stress this collective message as the campaign unfolds.
Yeah, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think well, three things. One is don't throw away the recovery. We've worked hard to get here, so don't gamble on David Cameron. Second, playing out that team clearly, because the Conservative campaign will be very presidential. It'll be around David Cameron. Possibly Ken Clarke might get a walk-on part. William Hague sometime if he re-emerges. We've not seen a lot of him since that Ashcroft business, but we know George Osborne isn't very popular, while Gordon Brown has a problem with his popularity. He would lose in a straight popularity poll with David Cameron, so he's shown, I've got all these friends, Harriet Harman, Alan Johnson, whoever. And then thirdly, his background is a middle-class background, and he's painting David Cameron as somebody who comes from Eton, the Bullingdon Club, all of that, married an heiress, because he knows, Gordon Brown, that this is a weakness for David Cameron, and Cameron knows that himself, and he will try to play that down. So Gordon Brown was trying to set out the battlefield in his favour.
So, Fraser, do you think that plays? Because presumably you're not going to see anything crude from Gordon Brown or the Cabinet where they actually use the word Eton. They just say, I'm an ordinary person from an ordinary background.
It's all done in code, and it's done not really to address the floating voter, but the Labour base. They're very keen the Labour voters come out and vote for them again, because there's been a lot of disillusionment amongst the Labour core vote, and if they stay away, Gordon Brown really is sunk. And it does show that if he uses these class war dog whistles, then the Labour vote does consolidate. And what we've seen in the last few weeks is not so much the Tories go down in the polls, but Labour recover. So I think Gordon Brown will be using every tool at his disposal to persuade people who identify themselves as progressives or Labour sympathisers to come out and place that vote in that ballot box.
And Kevin, you were talking there about, and then we can see the Conservative bus go past with Vote for Change on the Tory bus there. I don't know whether we can pick that up, but I'm sure we'll be seeing an awful lot of that bus over the coming weeks. So the battle buses are going around Westminster. We've seen one of the betting shops with a kind of big billboard on the side with the latest odds in this election. Let's just go back to the strategy behind a lot of the thinking. Presumably, if Gordon Brown or the Labour strategists thought that Gordon Brown was a big selling point, he wouldn't have come out with the Cabinet. It's because he's a weak leader that they're having to do that.
Yeah, he's taken a lot of knocks over the years, and they know they have a problem selling him, which is why he can show, look, I'm not a team of one, I'm one of a team. I've heard him say that before, and that can play in the country if they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket, and that basket is called David Cameron. So it's a very sensible move by Labour to present that team. Now, of course, whether it works or not, we'll have to wait and see. But we're going to get this big contrast in styles. We'll see so much of David Cameron from the Conservatives. We'll see Nick Clegg and Vince Cable from the Lib Dems, who Nick Clegg seems to acknowledge that his deputy is more popular than him, which is why both faces are on their battle bus. And then we're going to see Labour mob-handed.
Yes, it's interesting, actually. We interviewed Chris Huhne here a couple of hours ago, and I said, what's your unique selling point? And he was just all he spoke about was Vince Cable.
Yeah.
And there was no mention of Nick Clegg.
He is, and Vince Cable is incredibly popular. He's more popular than his leader, he's more popular than his party, he's more popular than Alistair Darling, and certainly more popular than George Osborne.
You can't vote for Vince Cable at the next election, though. Well, you can if you live in Twickenham, but apart from that, it doesn't really help the Lib Dems. This is why it's frustrating, because sure, they've got this semi-superstar in the form of Vince Cable, but he's not really helping the Lib Dem support raise that much.
Now, let's just talk about, because you were talking, Kevin, about the performance of Gordon Brown and how he comes across. The big new thing in this election is going to be the TV debates. Now, do you think that Labour are worried about that? The fact that actually, he's not a kind of quick jabbing, he's not Blair the barrister who was very quick on his feet.
Yeah, but actually that plays to Labour now, because he's going to be so underestimated. You just come out standing, you're seen as having done well. We saw with the debate between the three chancellors that George Osborne, very low expectations when he went in. They'll have hurt George Osborne on a personal level, but he did okay. He stayed standing. Now, Gordon Brown's a much cleverer debater than he's given credit for. And I think David Cameron's the one with it all to lose because he's out in front and he agreed to them. Nick Clegg's the clear winner in that he's in there playing with the big boys rather than having to lurk around the corner and banging on the door trying to get in. But I think Brown's not a bad debater. I think he's been underestimated, and he'll do better than you suggested.
Yes, and Fraser Nelson, Peter Mandelson has been playing that up to the absolute maximum, hasn't he? Saying, Gordon Brown is, he may not be as quick on his feet. He is almost going around lowering expectation so that Gordon Brown will then be seen to have done much better if he does okay.
Yeah, so this is the great wild card in this election campaign. We've We've never had these debates before, and the impact will be the difference between what people expect and what they see. So if they expect Gordon Brown to be this sort of completely inarticulate, thuggish idiot, and he turns out to be quite good, then that will be a win for Gordon Brown. If they expect David Cameron to walk on water and he stumbles, it will be a negative for him. So everybody will be going around saying their candidate will be doing badly, but David Cameron does have this expectations levied against him.
Just one other final thought, if I could, from both of you, on the impact of the internet on this election, because that's the other thing that people are talking about, and Chris Grayling slightly undone by a kind of recording that suddenly gets posted.
Yeah, although Howard Flight was undone at the 2005 election, somebody just records it and then gives it to a newspaper, TV, radio. The internet makes it harder for politicians, easier to be caught, because you can grab someone and put it on the net immediately, and it's available to all the media. And these things, in truth, only matter once they get into the mainstream media. But it's not an internet election. It's the first real TV election because of those three big debates.
I'm not so sure. I think the internet will play quite a big factor in this campaign. It has hyper scrutiny. If a politician lies in an interview and he doesn't get picked up by the interviewer, he can get torn apart on the internet, including the Spectator's own coffee house website. But everybody, I put in a quick ad.
Shameless plug.
But there are these army now of bedroom bloggers who are bringing scrutiny in politicians that did not exist before. And I think that if you're trying to pull one over on the electorate, it will be so much harder now, because you've got hundreds of tiny guys giving their analysis on their blogs. I think it really is going to be the difference.
People use the internet for consumer decisions. Should I go and see that film? Should I buy that TV? Very few people look at the internet for their politics. It's still a minority area. Most voters will watch TV, listen to the radio, and read the newspapers.
Both of you, thank you very much. Hugh, it looks like we're still in a job.
John, thank you very much. John Sopel there with guests on College Green. We'll be talking to John a little later on. Nick Robinson is still with me, and Nick is about to leave to follow some of the campaign. So let's just ask Nick what he's going to do before we carry on. Nick, what is it?
Well, the Prime Minister is still here, but he is about to go out and about, the first campaign visits, and I'll be following him on some of those, and there's a month of that to come with each of them. Each of the party leaders, the major parties, the other parties as well, of course, trying to reach out to voters in individual constituencies.
What's likely to be going on right now?
I think I'm told that he is actually thanking Downing Street staff now. Downing Street will change. I've been saying again and again that the political staff leave with their phones. They have to hand them back in. My phone is full of text messages saying you can't get me on my old number now. They have to have a party number. They can no longer use government emails and government phones and so on. So there is a sense that the team is breaking up. Now, many of them will shift from here to Labour Party HQ, but it is possible that people who've worked very, very closely together, civil servants along with party people, for many years, may never do so again. I think it's always worth remembering that sort of thing on a day like today, because there is a sense that people can have its routine, we knew it all. It's not about power. These guys are throwing themselves at the mercy, if you like, of ordinary electors. And if electors choose not to give their votes to the Labour Party, that team who've been governing there, many of them for 13 years, may never be in that building together again.
Time and again, in that statement by the Prime Minister, he did precisely that. He appealed directly to voters. He said, I'm asking you to give me a mandate for A, B, C, D and E. Now, those pledges are ones that he clearly thinks that people will be able to latch on to and relate to very easily.
Simple messages, I thought. Secure the economic recovery, protect public services, and he listed a series of guarantees about policing and GPs, about schools as well. And then finally, the big promise, no detail today, but a promise of detail in the future, of political reform. And I think in that sense, he thinks that is the core appeal to the country, saying that he, and alongside him now, Alistair Darling, the man he tried to sack, but now says he'll keep as Chancellor if he stays as Prime Minister, will do what's right, the big decisions, as he called it, on the economy, that Labour, he claims, can be trusted on the public services, and crucially and newest of all, that he will reform politics so people don't have to have the anger that they've felt in recent years. The way Gordon Brown operates, the way that political mind works, is with this phrase we often hear, dividing lines. What he's doing with the public is each time saying, I'm here on the right side of this line, my opponents, in his view, are on the wrong side. That's the territory that he wishes to define for the election.
And just a final thought about clarity. We mentioned the clarity of the pledges there. How does that compare to the clarity or otherwise that's coming from the Conservatives, the Lib Dems and others?
From the Conservative leader this morning, we got a much more generalised message. Yes, there was a list of some of the policy changes, but it was a critique of Gordon Brown. He basically said, his opening line was, you don't have to wake up to another 5 years of Gordon Brown. And then he promised that there would be optimism and hope coming from the Conservative Party. It is, though, merely day one. Many days to come, many more details to come. Today is about a single abiding thought or an image that they hope will sear in the voters' minds.
Nick, enjoy it. Talk to you soon.
We will.
Nick Robinson there, our political editor, who's off on his travels straight away, follow the Prime Minister, who we think is still inside at the moment, but will probably emerge in a short while to start the formal patch of campaigning that he's now embarking on. A short while ago, of course, he was at Buckingham Palace. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, is still there. Nick, over to you.
Yes, the public formalities, Hugh, are over of calling this general election. Gordon Brown having his cabinet meeting, then making his way here to Buckingham Palace, having that 20-minute audience with the Queen, who'd come up specially from Windsor this morning by helicopter. An audience in Buckingham Palace at which Gordon Brown, after his journey from Downing Street, asked for a dissolution of Parliament. That was agreed to by the Queen. Gordon Brown then leaving Buckingham Palace, making his way back to Downing Street to declare that Britain will have a general election on May the 6th. Now, this may, of course, be the last time that Gordon Brown sees the Queen until after the general election. It's not expected that he will have the normal prime ministerial audience with the Queen during the campaign, not least, of course, because he will be so busy with that campaign himself. So, who will it be on, one assumes, May the 7th, who will be invited by the Queen to form the next government of the United Kingdom? Will it be Gordon Brown returning to be invited to form another government, or will it be Gordon Brown coming here to relinquish the seals of office as Prime Minister and handing them on to somebody else? That now is a matter for the electorate of this country to decide as the general election campaign of 2010 gets underway. Here at Buckingham Palace, it's over to the normal business of the day. It's changing the guard as this election campaign begins.
Nick, just wondering, when we look at the process of the ceremonial this morning, and people keep on saying, well, it was just a few minutes in there, and really it's just a formality. The actual request for a dissolution just takes a few minutes, but we need to underline the constitutional significance of what's gone on this morning.
The Queen, as head of state, is the only person who can grant a dissolution of Parliament. Now, in circumstances such as these, she has no option but to assent to a request from a Prime Minister. What, of course, is more problematic is if a Prime Minister comes and asks for a second dissolution of Parliament this year. Now, that could occur, of course, if there is a hung Parliament, if there isn't a clear outcome to this election. And then the monarch does have some latitude to refuse a dissolution, but it is only in those very tightly constrained circumstances that it has been agreed, according to principles laid out by a former private secretary to George VI, Sir Alan Lascelles, in 1950, in those very particular circumstances that the monarch can, having taken advice from constitutional experts and others, if it is felt that the Parliament is still viable, or if it's felt that it is not in the economic interests of the country, in those very particular circumstances, she could refuse a second dissolution of Parliament so that others can form a government. But that all at this stage entirely hypothetical. The Queen, as a constitutional monarch, will remain outside of the political process. She has this morning, as you say, assented to a request from her Prime Minister for a dissolution of Parliament so that this general election can now begin.
Nick, thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent at Buckingham Palace. So the audience took place and the request for the dissolution was made by the Prime Minister, and the Queen, of course, accepted that and granted that. So Parliament will be dissolved. We'll be back with Nick Witchell in a short while, but John Sopel is waiting for us on the green.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, in this election, everyone is going to be watching very closely what the opinion polls tell us, because they do act as an important barometer for the political parties, for the public as a whole. So we can have a quick look, I think, at the three latest opinion polls which have been released today. What we're looking at now is a YouGov poll for the Sun newspaper. It has the Conservatives on a 10-point lead. They're on 41% to Labour's 31%. The Liberal Democrats on 18% there, you can see, and an opinion poll, OPINIUM poll for the Daily Express also has the Tories on a 10-point lead. They've got 39%, with Labour on 29%, the Lib Dems on 17%, 15% others, while today's ICM poll in The Guardian shows a much smaller lead for the Conservatives. So they are on 37%, Labour on 33%, 21% to the Liberal Democrats, and 9% they have for others. Well, Dr. Roger Mortimer is Head of Political and Electoral Research at the polling organisation Ipsos. Maury, he is with us now. What are we to read in these polls? Where do you think things stand as the starting gun is fired today?
Well, everything is very finely poised at the moment between a hung Parliament and a Conservative win. And if you look at the polls, although it looks as if that's a big gap between those three polls, because of the margin of error of any poll, that's actually not that different. All the polls in the last fortnight have had the Conservatives within a couple of points of 39%. Almost all of them have had Labour within a couple of points of 31%. So roughly an 8% lead, give or take a bit. But that bit matters because even a 1% swing can be worth 20 seats.
Right. So going into this election, the Tories are ahead, but not yet in the territory where they can say it's in the bag.
Exactly.
How much do opinion polls change during election campaigns themselves?
Well, it varies very much, obviously, but in a campaign where the campaign is mattering, where parties are making points against each other, they can change quite a lot. And I think in this election we're expecting the possibility of that happening. We've got the leaders' debates, which are a new factor, and we don't know how much difference that's going to make, but clearly has the potential to do so.
OK, let me just interrupt you for a moment, because I want to just give you a piece of breaking news that I've just been given relating to all that we're hearing at the moment. It is that Parliament is going to be dissolved on Monday, the 12th of April. So let me just explain what that means. In a sense, what we're going to have is this week, it's called the wash-up period, where the party managers will try to get together, salvage what legislation that they can agree on. Anything they can't agree on will simply fall. But we'll have the odd spectacle that although the election campaign has started, and I'm sure by the end of today we'll have seen all three battle buses in various different places, tomorrow there will be Prime Minister's questions almost as normal in the House of Commons, and then the House is not going to come back until the 18th of May. Now that is a week later than would normally be anticipated, but so you're going to have polling day on the 6th of May, and then you'd have expected everyone to come back the following Monday or Tuesday, which is when they then swear in, they declare their oath of allegiance to the Queen, and everyone has to do that. All the new MPs that are elected would do that, and then business would begin with the first piece of business to re-elect the Speaker, who will be presiding over those events. That is now not going to take place until the 18th of May. I just wanted to bring you that up to the minute. Let me just bring back Roger Mortimer, because I'm sorry to have interrupted you. I just wanted to bring that in as well. But is it, I mean, what I really wanted to get at was, are election campaigns about suddenly building up a lead, or is it about consolidating what you have?
It's about consolidating what you have, if you can. But we all know that things go wrong, there are gaffes, there are issues that suddenly come up during election campaigns that completely change the perspective. And it's possible for there to be a sudden shift in the mood, as there was back in 1992, when it looked as if Neil Kinnock was winning, and suddenly there was that disastrous election rally, which I think everybody in retrospect thinks was the moment when things changed.
Yes, that's very interesting. Also, I just want to ask you this. Can you explain to me why we've had, is there good psephological reasons, polling reasons, why we've had so few hung parliaments? So in 1974, February, the last one.
Well, the way our electoral system works, normally a party only needs a small lead to get an overall majority. So you'd expect there to be hung parliaments fairly rare. But what's happened in the past few years is that the third parties, the Liberal Democrats, the Nationalists and so on, have grown. They've been winning more seats, and suddenly the party needs a much bigger lead than they used to. So hung parliaments are going to be likelier now than they used to be.
Right, OK, I'll tell you what, I want to bring in a guest because there is another side to all this and the polling evidence, and that is, of course, that people bet on elections. Tina's Thought and Paddy Power is here to tell us about are you taking much money on the election?
Yes, it's massively busy already at the moment. I mean, obviously today the election's just called and we all knew it was going to happen today, didn't we? But it's just been called today, so suddenly there's a new kind of lease of life given to the betting on it. So it's going to be one of the biggest betting events of the year, especially leading in towards the World Cup and all that kind of stuff. But the election is there's been massive swings in the betting already. I mean, we saw like the Tories were such short odds, as short as 1 to 12 at one stage, they're to 1 to 6 now. And we see the polls have got a different reading.
Go a bit more slowly for us. For those 1 to 12, that means you bet a quid.
I know you bet 12 quid to win just one.
To win just one.
Yeah, so just that shows how strong of favourites they were. Now the odds have changed slightly, and they're not as strong favourites, but they're about half that now. So you bet 6 quid to win one now, and Labour's odds have been tumbling all the time a little bit. So you're looking at, I mean, people aren't really sure. About 12 months ago, you would have been absolutely positive that the Tories were going to win easy. Now maybe a hung Parliament could be the bet that people are having, you know, because it has changed quite a lot.
And Roger, from what you're telling me, you're saying you'd keep your money in your pocket for a little bit longer, wouldn't you?
I think I would, yes.
Because you still think there's so much uncertainty out there.
Exactly. This is the closest election we've had in years.
Yes, I was just wondering what are the odds? What odds would I get on a hung Parliament if I was to open my wallet?
Well, a hung Parliament now is only 13 to 8, so it's not that big a price really, and that would have been as big as 5 or 6 to 1 not so long ago. But that is the way people are thinking, that, you know, the Lib Dems will be the kingmakers. So it'll be interesting to see what does happen. But I think at the moment, yeah, that's probably the shrewd sitting on the fence bet anyway.
So, but are you getting a lot of punters coming in and having a go at this?
A huge amount so far, and it's only going to get more and more as the media hype builds around towards the election. Everyone want to get a piece of it. I mean, polls are like obviously a really good indicator of how people are thinking, but don't forget the betting is the truest indicator, because where you actually put your hard-earned, that's the way you're going to vote.
And well, that's a very interesting point, because I know that people do this thing, the spread betting. It makes me sound like I'm a Neanderthal, but I mean, you know, where people are kind of essentially taking a punt on how many seats they think they'll get, and they will win or lose, how far wide they are of that margin. Hasn't the spread stayed more or less the same of a small Tory majority?
Yeah, it's stayed in or around the same. You're dead right. It's stayed in or around the same, but just the odds around that spread have changed ever so slightly over the time. So I mean, the Tory majority is still the most likely outcome, but it's certainly not a certain outcome.
But which is interesting, because, as you say, the people who really care are the people who are very confident are the people who are prepared to put their money behind it. And you're still saying that those bettors who do spread betting, and they're the brave ones, they still believe that it's going to be a Tory majority.
Well, they do believe that, but they're not as confident as they would have been a short while ago.
Right. Okay. and I'm just fascinated. Do you think that this is a market that is growing? The political betting market, because there are always some people who bet it, but it was a pretty niche market compared to, I mean, you mentioned the World Cup. There's not going to be anything like the same money waged on the general election as there is on, whether Wayne Rooney's going to score 6 goals during the World Cup campaign.
Yeah, that'll be good. But no, you're dead right. It's not as big as the World Cup, but you're still looking. There'll probably be over 20 million bet in the run-up to the election across the industry in the UK, which is a huge amount of money if you think about it. And I think the fact that the election is much closer than we would have thought it was going to be a few months ago is the key, because then people do see there's a chance of getting a little bit of value. Because most people out there, their average bet's going to be like a 10 or 20 quid. They're not having thousands on, so there's no point in betting really, really short odds. They'll be looking for an edge. They might think if Labour have a chance of surviving if they're a Labour fan. Let's say 7 to 2. Well, that's good. 3.5 times my money,
Fantastic. Okay, bewildering array of numbers you've just given us. Thank you very much indeed, Paddy Power, Roger Morgan. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. From here, while we consider the odds, back to you, Hugh.
John, thank you very much. It's John Soper there for us on College Green. Now, let me just remind you, if you're just joining us, it's 20 past 11, and the Prime Minister, in the past 40 minutes or so, emerged there from number 10 Downing Street and announced the formal date of the election. And of course, he confirmed that the election will take place on Thursday, May the 6th, and that Parliament will then reconvene, as we understand it, on the 18th of May. And there will be the state opening of Parliament will take place, well, my guess is maybe 10 days, a fortnight after that, but it'll be pretty quickly after the 18th of May. Our chief political correspondent, Laura Kuenssberg, is with me, because Nick Robinson has gone off to chase the Prime Minister, although I think, Laura, the Prime Minister's still in there, isn't he?
The Prime Minister is still here, and he said at the end of his statement, let's go to it, but he actually is still stuck in a meeting. I've just seen the General Secretary of the Labour Party, Ray Collins, go in as well, so perhaps they're just embroiled in a few finishing touches to what's going to happen at these campaigning events this afternoon before the PM gets on his way.
What did you make of the statement he made, and what were the themes that you took away from it?
Well, number one, no surprise. The main thing, securing the recovery. Don't go for the Tories because they would risk the progress that has been made. Unemployment would go up again, the Prime Minister warned. He also said small businesses would be more at risk. So that was no surprise. His central message, we're going to hear again and again, is that things aren't quite as bad as they might have been, so stick with me. One other thing I think was interesting, he promised in the next few days to spell out more detail of some kind of electoral reform. He used the word democratically, talking about all our forms of politics being democratically elected. Hint there maybe that in the manifesto there might be some promise, another Labour promise, on reforming the House of Lords. But I thought it was quite interesting to see him out there flanked by all of his cabinet ministers. Very interesting that he chose to come out with Harriet Harman and Alistair Darling. I think perhaps a few months ago we wouldn't have seen the PM coming out with Alistair Darling because things weren't quite so good between the two of them then. Also, though, I thought what was interesting was the Prime Minister again chose at the very beginning of his statement to make the point about him being from an ordinary background. It's one of Labour's favourite digs to make, really, not just because the Prime Minister is giving a bit of his own backstory there, but of course they're trying to draw a line between him and between Mr Cameron and his privileged upbringing. We just don't know if the electorate will respond to that, though. Labour has run into some trouble previously using this class war strategy, but it was right there at the very top line of the Prime Minister's speech.
Laura, stay with us. We'll be back with you in a second, and we'll talk about some of the different themes that we've picked up as well, not least with David Cameron and with Nick Clegg. We saw the Cabinet flanking the Prime Minister here earlier on, and among them the Home Secretary, Alan Johnson. If we join John Sopel, I think the Home Secretary is with him.
Yeah, Hugh, thank you very much. I am joined by Alan Johnson. And you are still the Home Secretary, even though we've got this period of the election.
And will be until May the 6th, at the earliest.
At the earliest, right. Laura Kuenssberg and Hugh Edwards were just talking there about the statement that Gordon Brown made when he came out. What did he mean when his opening remark, the first thing he says to the British people, I'm an ordinary man from an ordinary middle-class background. Why did he need to say that?
Just needs to emphasise the fact that he knows about the issues of hardship. He knows about what it's like to be in a normal middle-class family when you're going through difficult times.
Yeah, was he saying unlike anybody else?
Well, I think, look, if you want to look at who's playing the character card, look at the Conservatives. I mean, if you go around the country, you'll see a very nice photograph of Gordon Brown, incidentally. But this is how the Tories are going to play this. They're going to be very personal about the Prime Minister's character, and I think you can forgive the Prime Minister for just making the point, look, lots of people analyse my character, here's my background, here's where I come from, and here's what I believe in.
But do you think that David Cameron's background is an issue?
Well, I think what David Cameron is doing is making Gordon Brown an issue and making this a very personal campaign. I think what Gordon would want, and I think the British people want, a focus on policy. They get more serious about policy the closer we get to an election. And now they'll be looking about the low interest rates at the moment. Are we going to keep them? Levels of unemployment, which were forecast to go to 3 million, 4 million, seem to have dipped about 1.5, 1.6 million. That's good news. They want to ensure that recovery is sustained. And they'll be looking at the parties on that basis. Who's capable of making the tough decisions to ensure that happens?
But in terms of people using other people's backgrounds, I mean, Labour were the first to do it in Crewe and Nantwich, where you kind of, the Tory toff, and there was a bloke dressed up in a top hat and all the rest of it.
The kind of thing that happens at by-elections.
Okay, but
aren't you determined from Labour Party headquarters?
Sure, but aren't you trying to do the same now, but more subtly?
No, we're not trying to do the same at all. I mean, I've made the point several times. David Cameron is as responsible for his background and his childhood as I am for mine. The issue is about how you approach the problems that we have today. Where Cameron and Osborne got it absolutely wrong, and we should continue to remind the public of that, is they were practically unique in Western politics to say that the answer to this global recession is to cut savagely and cut quickly. They were wrong about that. We would have been in depression now, not recession, if we'd have followed their advice.
But you say that, and yet you look last week at the row that took place over national insurance, and you suddenly get all these business leaders writing to the papers and saying the Tories have got it right. Now, these are people who don't normally raise their head above the parapet.
Let me tell you something about that, John. They're saying they're saying we don't want a tax increase. Well, big news. No one wants a tax increase. It's a difficult part of the equation. About a quarter of the savings we want to make will come from tax rises. 60% of those tax rises will be paid by the 5% highest earners, so the people who have the broadest shoulders to take it. But the issue is that where else are you going to find that money? Now, this is the oldest trick in politics. David Cameron said it himself, it was the oldest trick in politics, that you just pretend there's another 6-7 billion that you can rip out of public services without affecting schools and hospitals and policing. It's fantasy land. And because they didn't have the courage to carry forward the argument that actually there needs to be an increase in tax, and you could increase VAT, that will hit the poorest hardest, it's because they haven't got the courage to do that they've taken refuge in this old scam of just magic up some savings out of Whitehall.
One thing that is absolutely undeniable about the Labour record over the past 13 years is you have spent massively more on public services like the health service, like education. But are you saying that all of that money has been extremely well spent and there's nothing that can be taken out?
I'm saying that money has been well spent, and if you look at the fact that people used to have to wait 3, 4, 5, 6 years for a cataract operation, 2.5 years for a hip replacement, if you look at a situation where we had too few nurses, too few doctors, crime doubled under the Tories, violent crime went up by 168%, it's down by 36% overall, violent crime down by 41%. If you look at what was happening in inner London, in our schools, only 31% of kids got 5 decent GCSEs after 18 years of the Tories. Yes, more teachers, more teaching assistants, more police, more nurses, more doctors.
More bureaucracy, more form filling.
Well, look,
GPs contracts, reorganisation.
The GP contract was absolutely the right thing to do. We haven't got time to go into it, but the right thing to do, because youngsters were coming through medical school and didn't want to be GPs because they had a 24/7 obligation. They were too tired to deal with their patients. All of those things were the right reforms to make. And it's not just about money into public services, it's about reforming public services as well. A personalised service, both in adult social care, in terms of the NHS, and now in terms of the police, in neighbourhood policing, one-to-one tuition in schools. It's a different type of public service. It's properly financed, delivering the right results for the public.
Can you win this election?
Yes.
Or is it just about making sure... What's the best...
Undoubtedly we can win this election, but the question probably in 2005, 2001, 1997 was, yes, we can win the election, but really we were quite confident. It was a kind of one-horse race in many respects. Now it reminds me of 92. And, perhaps the Tories start off favourites and we start off the underdogs. But it really, I think, focuses people's minds on we really could go back to the Tories. Now, I don't think the Tories have changed. That's what they've got to prove. They've got to try and prove that they've changed. Cameron's trying to do that all the time. We saw Grayling at the weekend suggesting one of many, many incidents where underneath that veneer, the Cameron veneer, it's the same old Tories.
Alan Johnson, this is arguments I'm sure that will play out over the next few weeks. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Hugh, back to you.
John, thanks very much. The time is 11:30. A very good morning. You're watching a BBC News special on the day the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, confirmed that a general election will be held on May the 6th. And he made the announcement here in Downing Street, outside number 10, after asking the Queen to dissolve Parliament.
Our economy is now moving forward, but to withdraw billions of pounds from the economy will put recovery at risk. Unemployment has now been falling, but a government that doesn't care to implement our plans to help the unemployed will see unemployment rise faster again. Small businesses are starting to grow, but a double-dip recession would hit thousands of them. That is why I'm asking the British people, I'm asking you, the British people, for a clear and straightforward mandate to continue the urgent and hard work of securing the recovery, building our industries for the future, and creating 1 million skilled jobs over the next 5 years.
The Conservative leader, David Cameron, and his wife met supporters in central London. Mr Cameron told them it was the most important election for a generation.
Let me tell you what I think this election is all about. It's about the future of our economy. It's about the future of our society. It's about the future of our country. It's the most important general election for a generation. And it comes down to this. You don't have to put up with another 5 years of Gordon Brown. there is today a modern Conservative alternative that has got the leadership, that's got the energy, that's got the values to get this country moving.
Well, the Liberal Democrat leader, Nick Clegg, said it was impossible to predict the outcome and that all bets were off in this election. He said it would not simply be a two-way fight between Labour and the Conservatives.
I think this is a huge, huge election. I mean, it's certainly the beginning of the end for Brown, that's for sure. But I think he is directly and personally responsible for so many of the things that have gone wrong in the last 13 years. The illegal invasion of Iraq that only we stood up against. The unfairness and inequality in Britain that we've been campaigning against through our policies of a fair tax switch in Britain. The rottenness and corruption in Parliament that we've been speaking about long before the other parties ever realised there was a problem.
Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, talking to some party workers at his headquarters in Westminster just a short while ago. Here in Downing Street, by the way, the Prime Minister still in number 10, talking to some party workers. He's already been saying his thanks to some Downing Street staff because, who knows, after the election, he might not be here as Prime Minister. So lots of these formalities have to be completed today. He's already visited Buckingham Palace and the Queen has agreed to dissolve Parliament. That's to bring all of Parliament's business to an end. That'll happen on the 12th. That's next Monday, after which the writs can be sent out and the election can take place on May the 6th. One of the big unknowns in the election campaign, clearly for us, is the debates. All the debates that are taking place, the three of them, and they'll be on specific themes and lots of comparisons already being drawn with the debates that happened during the American presidential contest, because they've had debates for decades, but here in Britain this will be the first time that the party leaders have gone head-to-head in an election campaign with debates in prime time on television. There'll be 3 debates, as I said, on BBC and ITV and Sky. And Graham Satchell has been investigating how they could influence the campaign.
Three men, 3 debates. A British election first. Many believe it could swing the balance in this campaign. Ever since a youthful Kennedy beat a sweaty Nixon 50 years ago, the TV debate has been a defining moment of the American election campaign.
But here in Britain, where we vote for a party and not a president, we've never had that kind of focus on the personality, the character, the TV skills of the leader until now.
In close elections, and this one looks to be close, the TV debates could be the thing that wins or loses the election for one of the candidates or the other. This is not like party election broadcasts. This is not like Prime Minister's Question Time. They're turnoffs. This is big time.
Get to your feet and tell us you knew nothing about the briefing against the Chancellor.
But if you're expecting the cut-and-thrust bear pit of the House of Commons,
as I pointed out a moment ago,
or the heckling and haranguing of a programme like Question Time, think again.
TV bigwigs and political parties have agreed a 76-point programme format. Audiences will be asked not to clap. And this is point 57. At the end of the programme, the 3 leaders will shake hands.
Just like American presidential debates, where candidates rehearse and try desperately not to make a gaffe.
They go through how they're going to stand at the podium, how they're going to react to questions, if they're going to be a negative reaction, how they're going to shake their heads. They do try very hard not to make a mistake, and sometimes that overshadows them actually giving the best answers possible.
That's not to say there won't be an opportunity for the well-chosen memorable moment, like this, from a 73-year-old Ronald Reagan.
I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Most pressure may be on David Cameron. Ahead in the polls, he's expected to do well. Gordon Brown, behind in the polls, may feel he has nothing to lose. But the main winner may be Nick Clegg, afforded the same time and status as the 2 bigger parties. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Well, Graham Satchell there, looking at the possibilities that are ahead of us in terms of these debates in this campaign, because it's the big unknown. What will the influence of those debates be? Lots of people warning already that they mustn't be seen to be dominating the campaign in any negative way and forcing out debate on other things and other forms of debate, but inevitably, because of the novelty, they will be a big thing for us to see. Laura Kuenssberg still with me, and Laura, we're waiting for the Prime Minister now to leave to start his campaign.
Yes, so just keeping an eye on the door there, because the engines have just gone on Gordon Brown's cars and his entourage, so it seems as if his departure might be very imminent. Off to the first campaign stop, which we expect will be something quite informal. It's already been dubbed the Canteen Campaign. I think we're going to see Gordon Brown trying to be appearing in informal, relaxed kinds of environments. I think we'll see him trying to mingle with people in quite a low-key, informal way. David Cameron will kind of be doing the same, really trying to hit as many places as possible, but be doing more public events, I imagine. His events might be slightly less controlled than the Prime Minister, because even from time to time we might see Gordon Brown even going in for one-to-ones to have a cup of tea with one family around the country. Nick Clegg at the same time will be trying to hit as many places where the Lib Dems have a chance to take a seat on a more traditional battle bus. Interestingly, though, he'll be appearing a lot of the time with Vince Cable. Why? Because the Lib Dems know that their Treasury spokesman plays very well with the public. He's a popular and well-respected figure. The PM, it sounds like, and seems like just a few of the security guys mingling around now, seems like his departure is very imminent now.
Laura, stay with us. We'll be back straight away. I'm just going to hand to John Sopel for a few minutes, and John, if we need to come back quickly, I know we'll come back, but John, over to you for a second.
Sure, Hugh, we'll watch that front door very closely. Thanks very much indeed. I should say there's a sort of, we've seen all the betting shops out here on College Green today. You might expect that. We've seen the pollsters out here on College Green. You would expect that too, and of course the politicians. I wasn't really expecting the crisp manufacturers to be out here, but you can get these hand-salted cooked sea salt Politi crisps, they're called, Politi crisps, with Gordon Brown's face on them. But if you don't fancy Gordon Brown's face on them, well, you've got, of course, the David Cameron crisps here, with his picture, and just so that there's no political favouritism whatsoever, you can have the Nick Clegg crisps. And I know which crisps the next person I'm going to speak to would prefer. He'll have the David Cameron crisp, because I'm joined now by Jeremy Hunt, the party's culture spokesman. Thank you very much.
Good morning, John. Yes, yeah. Salt and vinegar for all of us in the Conservative Party.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, and how prepared do you think you are as a party? Because you've had a kind of rocky few weeks in which we've seen the polls tightening.
I think the polls do go up and down. I mean, after 13 years of real disappointment, people are not going to give this election to anyone on a plate, and we've got to work very, very hard for every vote. But the Conservative Party has changed dramatically under David Cameron, and we are ready to ask the British people to trust us with their vote.
You say changed dramatically. I know you were listening when I spoke to Alan Johnson a few minutes ago, who was saying it's a veneer. You scratch it and it falls away, and we saw that maybe at the weekend with the comments from your colleague Chris Grayling.
I mean, I thought that was a deeply pessimistic comment. I mean, it's an absolutely glorious day here on College Green, and I thought...
Sorry, who made a deeply pessimistic comment?
I thought Alan Johnson's comment was a deeply pessimistic comment, because basically he was saying what Gordon Brown said outside Downing Street, which is, we may be awful, but the other lot are even worse. And actually, I think there is a contrast between a pessimistic vision from Labour, which says you've got to lump with this because there isn't any alternative, and a modern Conservative vision from David Cameron, which says there is a better way. We can tackle the problems we have. We have faith in our country. It's a great country. We've got to get on and put it back on its feet.
So hope, to borrow Barack Obama's words.
I think hope is going to be very, very important, and I'm afraid that what we also saw from Gordon Brown this morning was a sort of reopening of this class war strategy, which again is very negative, very backward-looking.
Do you think that's what it was? Do you think that comment about I'm an ordinary middle-class man from an ordinary middle-class background was a sort of what they call in the jargon dog whistle politics, so that it was, unlike that other guy, David Cameron?
I'm afraid that's what it was, and I think people only have to look at Gordon Brown's record. He was the man who got rid of the 10p tax band, which hurt the very poorest in society. He now wants to introduce a jobs tax, which will throw yet more people onto the dole. I mean, if you really want a party that's going to help the poorest, look at what David Cameron has done to the Conservative Party. He's put the NHS right at the centre of our political priorities. He's been there, he's transformed the Conservative Party to say, look, we have got to be here for the underdogs in society. That's why he's done this huge focus on Broken Britain.
But if the Labour government has been as calamitous as you suggest it has been, why aren't you further ahead? Why aren't you streets ahead? Why aren't you where Tony Blair was in 1997?
Well, for a very good reason. I mean, we've had 13 years of a government that has massively inflated expectations. And after 13 years of frankly being diddled, the country are not just going to turn to the next knight in shining armour who comes over the hillside. They're saying, prove it to us. And that's what we're going to do over the next 4 weeks. We're going to prove to the British people that there is a modern Conservative vision led by David Cameron that can sort out our economy, protect the recovery, get rid of this jobs tax that's going to destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs, increase unemployment yet further, and return to a more honest kind of politics. Because what we've had is a Prime Minister who promised to get rid of boom and bust, for example, and then gave us the worst recession in the developed world, and a whole series of broken promises like that. And people are done with that, and we've got to change what British politics is all about.
Aren't the British people going to say, look, this is still a precarious time for the UK economy? They seem to be getting it right now. You look at the experience of the cabinet that lined up on the steps outside Downing Street tomorrow, and they're going to look at the Tory party and say, talent's a bit thin. I mean, there's that guy Cameron, and there's Osborne, and there's Hague, and there's Ken Clarke. And then, with all due respect to yourself, they're going to say, well, we don't really know the rest of the team.
I think the one thing that people at home watching this are not going to be saying is that the government seems to be getting it right. They're going to be looking at the fact that we were the first country to go into recession. We were the last country to come out of recession. Gordon Brown promised us prudence. He's doubled the national debt. He promised he'd look after the poorest in society, and now he's introducing a jobs tax. This is a government that has failed abysmally to protect the British economy. And David Cameron's vision, it's a tough vision because he's saying, look, these aren't easy decisions, but he's prepared to take those decisions because he believes that it is possible to turn the country around, and it is possible to have a more optimistic, positive vision than what we saw from Gordon Brown this morning.
Okay, David, I'm grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Hugh, back to you.
John, thank you very much. Just worth underlining, of course, that the election takes on a different form, really, certainly in Northern Ireland and in Scotland and in Wales, where those devolved administrations have changed the entire pattern of British politics. And for that reason, the reporting of the election in the nations of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland is in a different shape, really, to the kind of reporting that we have throughout England, where most of the voters are, but there are still very big decisions to be taken from Westminster as far as Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are concerned. Raymond Buchanan, our correspondent in Scotland, is standing by just to tell us a little more about what's happening there today when the election is called. Ray, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Indeed, there is a fourth major party here in Scotland, the Scottish National Party, and some of their activists have gathered here in the east of Edinburgh constituency. They hope to take off Labour and gain for the SNP. You can see the paraphernalia of the election, this being the first day. And a bit of enthusiasm there as well from the activists. Now, they're gathered in this constituency to listen to the First Minister of Scotland, the party leader, Alex Salmond. He arrived at this venue just a few moments ago where he greeted party supporters before he's gone in to chat to some of the local electorate here. He will be arguing that Scotland needs champions of both a local and a national kind. And the argument he has is that if the election is close, then if the SNP have more MPs, they're hoping to get as many as 20, then they can have a big influence in the future Parliament. Particularly, he will argue, to stop Scotland suffering greatly as a result of public spending cuts, which we expect to come after the general election campaign. Mr Salmond, as I say, is chatting to members of the local electorate at the moment, and we will be speaking to him in a few moments' time to get his reaction to Gordon Brown's announcement this morning that formally we do indeed have a general election underway.
Raymond, thank you very much. Raymond Buchanan there with the SNP and their launch, their supporters there in Edinburgh. And of course, just Ray underlining there that there will be a different dimension to the debates in Wales, Scotland and in Northern Ireland. And worth reflecting on that with Laura Kuenssberg, who's with me. Laura, just to let viewers know once again, we're in Downing Street. We're expecting the Prime Minister to leave any second, so when that happens we'll see it. But the different shape of the campaign in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Yes, it's a real patchwork, and not just in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland where there are different fights. Of course, in different parts of England too. In the North East, for example, much of the fight will be between the Labour and the Liberal Democrats rather than Labour and the Conservatives. In the southwest of England, it'll be very much between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. So this campaign is going to be very different depending on where you live. Here comes Gordon Brown with his wife Sarah.
So the Prime Minister and his wife leave Downing Street on the day that the election was called, and looking slightly more cheerful, Laura, this time than he was when he went to the palace well over an hour ago.
Yes, he does look a bit cheerful. One of his aides this morning actually put out on the internet that this morning Gordon Brown was very calm, very determined, and in fact making people laugh. Interesting. He did look quite smiley, maybe more smiley because he's with his wife and his cabinet colleagues. That might be the difference. But I think certainly the whole of the Labour team is in finer spirits than if they'd been fighting this campaign just a few months ago. With the narrowing of the polls, they feel that there is more to play for, and that, you know, things aren't necessarily going to lead to doom and gloom. So interesting just though to think that the Prime Minister is leaving Downing Street to go off and do something he's never done before. He's going off to go and campaign to the public for another crack at being Prime Minister. Even though he's been living in there for 3 years, he's never had to actually test whether or not people want him in this famous address in London in terms of trying to convince the public that he deserves a crack at it. So in a sense, he's leaving Downing Street in the limousine as he has done many times, but he's actually going off to do something entirely new.
Well, let's stay with the pictures, Laura, because we are at least in the lucky position of being able to follow the cavalcade as it makes its way on this, effectively, the first day of campaigning. And what's he going to be doing today?
Well, this afternoon he's going to take a series of visits, a part of his canteen campaign, it's already been dubbed that. He's going to go to some marginals here in the southeast and really to go to the kind of events that we're going to see throughout the campaign, informal, in kind of workplaces or perhaps even sometimes in people's homes. I think we are not going to see Gordon Brown doing big, glossy, expensive-looking rallies. That is not the Labour strategy here. What they want is to see him out with ordinary people, to use that rather dreadful term, but to see him also in this kind of guise of being the underdog. Come and have a look at me. Come and listen to what I've got to say. Don't listen to what the Conservatives want to do. They would risk the kind of steps that we've managed to make in preventing the recession be not as bad as it might have been. So we're going to see these kind of low-key events from Gordon Brown. No glossy rallies, certainly no repeat of the kind of thing that we saw Neil Kinnock do in 1992 that worked out so dreadfully, an American-style rally where he looked as if he was taking things for granted. I think it's going to be low-key because famously, while Gordon Brown tends to grate on some people here in Westminster, the flip side of that is you hear so often from people in small-scale events, in private, he can be charm personified, and actually he can be very impressive in those kinds of private, more subtle events, as it were.
Well, if viewers are just joining us, it's the day the election was called. It's May the 6th, and there we see the Prime Minister's car, Gordon Brown, on his way. They've just turned off the embankment there. They've left the Thames, and they're making their way up through central London towards Kingsway and up towards, I think they're on their way to probably to St Pancras Station, Laura, as we understand it.
We understand Gordon Brown's going to be getting on a new kind of train. Of course, there's a reason for that. He's going to be getting on a new, shiny, fantastic kind of train to highlight, of course, what he would say is that the Labour investments in infrastructure and all those kinds of things are the kind of things that voters need to choose Labour for to guarantee that this kind of thing can happen in the future. But off he goes there. I think St Pancras is the final destination.
So it starts the campaign by train today, as Laura was saying, underlining what he will be saying is Labour's investment in public services. Over the next few days, before we have the dissolution of Parliament on Monday, is there any outstanding parliamentary business which is important for the running of the country?
I think there are certainly things to be done. I don't think there are any bills that are still in the mix that are really going to have an influence over the campaign. Certainly issues people care about. For example, there's an issue about digital piracy and the kind of things that you can download from the internet. Certainly that's actually caught the imagination of some sections of the public, but we're not looking at big issues still to be resolved that might actually affect the end of the campaign. But there are still a few things to get through. The constitutional reform bill, for example, which contains some interesting amendments, some particular things about whether or not peers can sit in the House of Lords without having to pay tax. That's been a fairly hotly debated issue here in Westminster, but no big outstanding pieces of legislation to get through in the wash-up, as they call the next few days, before Parliament actually finishes up its business.
Well, lots of Londoners will be looking on with some envy, Laura, as Gordon Brown makes a record-breaking journey from number 10 up to St Pancras Station. Hasn't stopped anywhere yet, which is a pretty impressive progress, really, but is now getting up towards the King's Cross area. And this is where he started. He's decided to start the campaign proper. If you're watching this is the Prime Minister's cavalcade on his way to St Pancras Station, where he's going to start his election campaign with a visit by train to parts of the southeast of England. The precise locations will be known a little later on. And a word then about David Cameron and Nick Clegg's day too.
Yes, well, David Cameron, we've already seen him on the stump, really, in quite what looked like quite an informal environment with dozens of party activists. He made a speech not far from here, but it looked very different because he chose to give a speech right by the River Thames with a view of Parliament in the background. But interestingly, though, his body language was all about not being part of this establishment. You should have a Parliament that listens to you. He was trying to present himself as somebody who really wants to shake things up at that famous building that he was pointing to over his shoulder as he referred to the House of Parliament over the river. Nick Clegg we also saw in a very informal setting with campaign staff gathered in the party headquarters, also not far from here. They too, though, will both be out on the stump today. David Cameron is going to Yorkshire and also to Birmingham. Why? Well, because he's going to those two areas where the Conservatives believe they really can and need to push through in those seats where they are vying for Labour neck and neck. So he'll be in that important area around Leeds and Yorkshire, where the Tories hope to pick up some seats. And perhaps more critically, he'll be in Birmingham, those Midlands marginals, those couple of dozen seats round about the big city of Birmingham, where Labour in many of those seats took control in 1997, and where the Tories have to make inroads if they've got any chance of getting to a majority. Because remember, they need an enormous swing, even to have the tiniest of majority. Even to get a majority of one, they need to take more than 100 seats. That's a big challenge, and the arithmetic is really loaded against them.
That's a point often forgotten these days when we look at the polls, and we see in some of them, as you say, a 10-point lead for David Cameron, and people assume that will lead to a big majority.
Yes.
It's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely not. A 10-point lead is roughly the territory that would give them a majority of one. So it's a really big deal. They need a huge swing, the second biggest swing since 1945 it would be, the biggest Tory swing since 1945, for David Cameron to be able to move in here and run a majority government.
A swing the size of Tony Blair's in 97 would certainly get him in, but that was an immense swing by historical standards.
Yes, and to some degree the Tory party are still suffering as a result of the size of that swing. The reason why they need numbers in to such a great extent in this campaign to start looking to majority is because their base was so decimated in 97, and then in 2001 and at the last election in 2005 they really didn't start to make very many inroads and building back into the kind of territory where they needed to be. I mean, Gordon Brown has struggled to keep control of his party. Let's make no mistake about that. But historically, the majority he has enjoyed, 66, is perfectly respectable. You know, we haven't been in the kind of territory that John Major was in, where his majority was small to begin with and then was whittled down over the years. Gordon Brown, by historical census, has had a decent majority, and that's one of the reasons why the Tories have to do so much for them to be able to have a clear run at running the country on their own without having to do deals with other parties.
Should point out to viewers, Laura, that when we say Gordon Brown leaves Downing Street on our strap there, it doesn't mean that he's resigned or anything. It means that he's literally left in the car today.
Left the building.
He's hoping that he's not left Downing Street.
He'll be hoping he's coming back, but of course many of the staff in here, this is their last day. Lots of people who've worked in Number 10 for many, many years, they're all moving out. They don't know if they're coming back or not, and over the last few days it's been quite interesting. Lots of advisors and people who've worked around these parts for many, many years. You know, my phone is full of messages saying, won't be on this number, I'll be packing up, or we've been packing up the office. And even this morning, I saw outside one government department a van from a shredding company. Now, I'm not suggesting that they were going in there to try to take away any documents that might have had incriminating information, but there certainly is a sense round here today that things are about to change. We don't know what to, but there certainly is that mood.
We're watching the Prime Minister's car making its way towards St Pancras Station. It's been on a rapid journey from Downing Street because the Prime Minister is setting off on the campaign trail today. So is David Cameron, of course, Nick Clegg and all the other party leaders. But this is the Prime Minister's car being accompanied there by the police outriders. And it'll be at St Pancras within a few minutes. And the Prime Minister will then take a train, one of the glossy new high-speed trains, to take him down to the southeast of England somewhere. We'll find out exactly where a little later on, but that's where the campaign is to begin. And I think if I'm spotting the streets correctly, which is a bit of a gamble, he's almost there. So that journey will begin quite soon. And really, Laura, it then starts a month of hectic, intense, exhausting campaigning for all of them.
Yes, it does. And they'll be trying to cover as many miles as they possibly can. They'll be doing as many hours as they possibly can. And they will be trying physically to meet as many people as they can, possibly. And remember, one long-time campaigner once said to me, if only I could get my candidate to meet every single person in the constituency, I know that they would all vote for them. And to some intents and purposes, that's what a campaign's all about. That opportunity for politicians to actually sit down and be face-to-face with members of the public. Because they know that in terms of politicians' reputations as a whole, it's not exactly great with the British public right now. And this opportunity for face-to-face contact is something that they don't often have. Interesting that in the last couple of years we've seen both Nick Clegg and David Cameron put huge amounts of effort into this. Cameron has done these Cameron Direct events around the country. Nick Clegg has also done his own town halls. And both of them have put a huge amount of time and effort into getting around the country and putting themselves into situations where they're having contact with people and where they're taking questions that haven't been prepared and they're in a sort of uncontrolled environment. And we're going to see a lot of that in the next 4 weeks, particularly with those two. Less so with Gordon Brown. I think the events will be pretty tightly controlled, and I doubt we're going to see much of him getting out a soapbox in some marketplace in some town in a marginal constituency somewhere. That's not going to happen.
So the Prime Minister is within a few hundred yards of arriving at St Pancras Station, passing Euston Station and the British Library, and will be at St Pancras very soon, and that gleaming new building which impresses everyone who visits it. And just wondering really, when he's embarking on this campaign with his wife, who left Downing Street with him just a short while ago, how important a role is she going to be playing in this?
I think a big one, and they've chosen that because 2 years ago Sarah Brown, after a very traumatic time for Gordon Brown, she appeared on the Labour Party conference platform and she essentially asked the Labour Party to back him. And she also knew she was speaking to the television cameras. She asked the country, really, to back Gordon Brown, even despite the torrid time he had had by those people who are meant to be his friends and his fans. She talked about my husband, my hero, in a very public way. And since then, that has changed things. We've seen a lot of Sarah Brown, and we've seen a lot of Samantha Cameron. David Cameron, a few weeks ago, called her his secret weapon. Then we understood the news that the couple were expecting another child, which, of course, people have perhaps cynically suggested that might have something to do with the election. I think that would be an outrageous thing to suggest.
Terrible.
But clearly it is something that helps them in the campaign, and we've seen Samantha be very visible. Yesterday she appeared in one of David Cameron's videos that was put up online, talking with him. She was out on a visit with him yesterday too, and we expect to see her probably a couple of times a week. We may see less of the Lib Dem leader's wife, Miriam Clegg, but all the same, she will be taking a more public role. And if you compare this to elections of years gone by, we're certainly going to see more of the leader's other halves this time round.
Magnificent view there of this part of central London. It's to the northern end of the central part, if I can put it that way, where we have the great mass of Euston Station, and then just in the distance St Pancras and King's Cross and the British Library, distinctive shape of the British Library there too. So this is where the campaign starts for the Prime Minister, having made that announcement in Downing Street this morning and having visited Buckingham Palace. Because if you've just joined us here on the BBC News Channel and on BBC One, This is a BBC special programme which is recording today's events and just telling you to confirm really that the Prime Minister has announced that May the 6th will be the date for the general election. Widely expected, but formally confirmed this morning. The Prime Minister got the Queen's permission to dissolve Parliament. That'll happen next Monday, the 12th of April, and Parliament will reconvene after the election of May the 6th on the 18th of May, and the state opening of Parliament, when the new government, if it is a new government, or the Labour government, if it's a continuation of that, will present their new programme, or indeed if it's a coalition of parties, who knows what the ultimate result will be, because lots of the polls over the last few weeks have given us some rather conflicting messages. Prime Minister right now, Laura, is turning into the main forecourt there, just beyond St Pancras Station, so he's almost there. Wondering what his thoughts will be when he knows that that month is ahead of him.
Wouldn't it be amazing to be inside his head and to know what he's really thinking at this moment? Especially because when you think about the fact that Gordon Brown wanted this job for so long, but he has never fought a general election as the potential Prime Minister. And of course, some people believe that the biggest mistake he has made since he's been in Number 10 is not having a general election much sooner. Of course, there was that potential that he would have a general election just a few short months after he moved into Number 10 back in 2007, but at the last minute he decided against it, earning himself the rather unkind nickname of Bottler Brown. And some people around here do believe that if he'd done that, he may well have won. That would have secured Labour a fourth term in government for the first time ever. It would have achieved his own long-held ambition to win a general election as the Prime Minister. But he didn't take that chance, and now, of course, the polls look very different indeed.
There we have the very familiar Gothic facade of St Pancras, which has been magnificently refurbished, and the Prime Minister's car stopped just outside that main entrance. You can see the Prime Minister there with Mrs Brown and being greeted by some well-wishers. And making their way into the station itself. As ever with these things, Laura, you wonder sometimes how exactly these events are constructed and how much preparation goes into them, or whether it's all Prime Minister really just meeting people who happen to be there.
As if by magic. I think often at these kinds of campaigning events, you're right, it is rather difficult to tell if they are genuinely members of the public who've thought, oh, jolly good, there's the Prime Minister, I'll go and have a look and say hi, or whether or not they are what are sometimes called endorsers, those members of the party or activists who suddenly appear at the convenient times in order to greet party leaders just where they happen to be walking along the street. I have to say, from an aerial view there, I'm unable to tell which it is. Sometimes these faces of party activists become rather familiar, and you can tell whether they are genuine well-wishers or whether they are people who are somehow linked with a political party. Clearly Gordon Brown relishing that chance to say hello either to some party friends or to shake hands with some members of the public.
So it's 5 past midday, and the Prime Minister has arrived at St Pancras Station, because that's where the first journey of this campaign will begin for him anyway, because he's going to start on the train where the journey to the southeast of England. I think Nick Robinson mentioned Kent earlier on, but it'll be the southeast of England, and that's where his campaigning will start, and no doubt there'll be lots of visits to marginals. But this is the welcome for Mr Brown and his wife. Possibly some party workers among them at St Pancras Station. And as we heard a short while ago, David Cameron and Nick Clegg too embarking on their campaign trail, but in different parts of the country, so we'll get a good sense by later tonight of the kind of pattern of journeys and campaigning that we've had today on this first day, and a sense really of the appetite of all of these party leaders for covering long distances in just one day's campaigning. The marginals, clearly, the marginal seats and there are at least 30 of them where they really can be called super marginals, where there'll be a lot of attention on precisely what the parties are trying to do. How much of a campaign team will the Prime Minister have with him on these journeys, Laura? Do you think? Is it quite a big team, or lots of the Prime Ministerial entourage will have been left behind?
Well, of course, there is a separation because people who've worked in Downing Street, many of them are civil servants, they'll all be staying behind. But in terms of the political teams, I think there will be quite a lot of them on the road. In terms of the debates, for example, we are expecting, in fact, from each political party, perhaps as many as 50 from each team. Now, I imagine because those are going to be such massive events that the gathered ranks will be bigger than they would be on a day-to-day basis. But it is a huge logistical operation to run these kinds of days when party leaders are out going to various different places during the day. And there are, therefore, an awful lot of people involved. And what that does mean, of course, is that the work that the parties have done so far becomes critically important, unless it might just be useful to reflect on the sort of state of the party's campaigning machines. The Conservatives, of course, for some time now, have been getting in very big numbers of donations. Compared to the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, they have got money to spend. They've been running a pretty organised, pretty disciplined, effective campaign for quite some time now, with their campaign war room down on 7 Millbank. Interestingly, it's the same building where New Labour was getting ready to try to move into government back in 1997. But the Conservatives have really transformed their campaigning operation in the last 3 or 4 years. The Labour Party, by contrast, has fewer people than it used to have. They've had difficulties with money, very reliant on union funding in a way that they have not been for quite some time. Their books are in a very different state to how they were going into the last election. And the Liberal Democrats, although compared to the other two certainly a smaller operation, many people in the party would credit Nick Clegg with shaking things up at the party HQ, making it a more efficient and more effective operation, which will certainly be tested to destruction in the next few weeks.
Prime Minister earlier, Laura, when we heard him here in Downing Street before he made his way there to St Pancras, used the word mandate several times in that address he gave on the steps of Number 10, almost inviting you to remember that he hadn't had a popular democratic mandate at an election, a point you made earlier on, but seeming to really acknowledge that and say, look, I now want the mandate for these reasons, and there were 5 very clear reasons there, at least 5 reasons that he hopes people will remember. Challenge, I suppose, for all the parties is to have 3 or 4 pledges that people will be able to grasp.
Yes, because if we think back to 97, one of the things the Labour Party did manage to do effectively was this idea of having these 5 pledges, these pledge cards. We used to see them wave around all the time. In fact, John Prescott still waves around his 1997 pledge card with pride, claiming that every single pledge on that card was met. But you're right, in a sense, the next 4 weeks is a challenge to get across some dominant theme, something that people can grab on to and associate with the party.
So the Prime Minister and his wife, they're on the main concourse there inside St Pancras Station, making their way slowly towards the train, and I think it's safe to say here, definitely meeting members of the public.
I think those are definitely members of the public, yes. But I wonder if he's also in danger now of missing his train. He left Downing Street rather late. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister wouldn't want to hold up the efficient running of any of Network Rail services. But it's interesting this. I don't expect we're going to see this much of this kind of unplanned contact between Gordon Brown and members of the public during the campaign. Certainly looks to be in rather a good mood. Relieved perhaps, as others are certainly, that finally, after even what he described as the worst kept secret in Westminster, this is now underway. In recent days, talking to politicians, it's almost been as if the preparations have been going on for so long. They've done all they can, and all they just wanted was actually to get going.
And let's face it, couldn't really delay it much longer. June the 3rd was I think the last day that was possible for this election, so he's almost right in the corner.
Yes, he played it long. It was very unlikely he would ever go till that June date because the local elections have been firmly in the diary for Thursday, May the 6th for a long time now. But despite flirting with the idea of an early election in March, there was, a bit of speculation around that because the polls were looking quite narrow then. He decided not to go for that, played it long, going for Thursday, May the 6th.
So as the Prime Minister makes his way towards that train, I think we'll leave St Pancras Station there. As Mr Brown and Mrs Brown battle their way through the crowds, and the Prime Minister looking quite cheerful as he launches this campaign for the election on May the 6th. And Laura, we'll leave it there for a second, thank you very much, but we'll be following the Prime Minister's progress, obviously, throughout the day and for the weeks ahead. In the meantime, we're going to go back to Edinburgh because Raymond Buchanan is still there for us, and I think he has the SNP leader with him.
Indeed, Hugh, I promised you the SNP leader, Alex Salmond, and here he is with his activists in the background. First of all, Mr Salmond, your reaction to the formal announcement this morning of the general election campaign?
Well, it's not the greatest surprise we've ever had, but we're looking forward to the campaign, and it's a very auspicious day, of course. Like April 6th is the anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath, Scotland's Declaration of Independence. Now, I don't think that was uppermost in Gordon Brown's mind when he chose April the 6th to declare the election, but nonetheless, a pretty auspicious start to the campaign for the SNP.
You've set the target of 20 seats. You currently have 7 at Westminster. How confident are you now that you'll be able to make up enough ground to win that many? Many have described it as very, very ambitious.
Well, I believe in setting ambitious targets, and that stood us in good stead in winning the Scottish elections 3 years ago, winning the European elections last year. Either of these results would take us to that ambitious target. My view is if you win arguments, then you win elections, and we intend to win the arguments in this campaign. Our message is Scotland needs champions, local champions like here in Edinburgh East, national champions across the country. And luckily in Scotland we don't face the dismal choice as they do south of the border in Labour and Tory. We've got a real alternative, and that alternative is the SNP.
Now, your critics will say that the SNP are irrelevant in this election. They'll look at you as First Minister of Scotland, say you've got a very important day job to be getting on with. How relevant will the SNP be in this British general election?
Well, I think more relevant than ever before. I mean, the other parties have blown the gaff in their campaigns. I mean, the Labour Chancellor says he's planning cuts which are deeper and tougher than those of Margaret Thatcher. The Tories would match these, and they're planning an extra cut on Scotland. They'll take our resources and cut public expenditure even more. So in these circumstances, the need for Scotland to have national champions in the SNP is greater than ever before. And if we get the balanced parliament, which we'd like to see, then we can have real influence in making gains for the nations of Scotland and Wales, of our Welsh allies and Plaid Cymru. So more relevant than ever before, and stronger than ever before.
You talked about what you would like to stop the other parties doing. What are the positive policies you're going to be offering the electorate?
Well, our positive policy on this anniversary declaration of Arbroath is to have a referendum on independence for Scotland, and that's the legislation we'll be bringing before the Scottish Parliament. Our positive
Nothing to do with this election.
Our positive policies are in government in Scotland. What's to do with this election is to make sure that substantial, deeper, tougher cuts, the ones that are promised by the Labour and Tory parties, don't get brought down upon Scotland and wreck our plans for the economy, for public spending in Scotland. Therefore, Scotland needs champions at Westminster. We need champions to stick up for the nation and make sure a few of the decisions over the next few years go in Scotland's direction, and that would be something hugely welcomed by the people of Scotland.
This will be a different election for you on several levels. First of all, you are not standing as an MP for the first time in more than 2 decades. And secondly, you are now in government and therefore have a track record in government which you will have to defend. How confident are you you'll be able to defend the decisions you've made as a minister over the last couple of years?
Well, I think the record of the SNP as a minority government in Scotland is excellent. We're proud to stand on that record. It stands comparison. Actually, the minority government in Scotland is much more stable than the majority government has been at Westminster. So we're proud to stand on that record, but we're proud to speak up for Scotland, because in this environment, with what's coming from Westminster, it's high time somebody said, look, let's protect what matters in health and education and vital services, and let's cut what doesn't matter, like Trident missiles, the remnants of the ID card scheme, nuclear dumping. Let's have real priorities in public spending, a message which will be well received in Scotland, and I think will find a lot of support south of the border as well.
Alex Salmond, SNP leader, thank you very much for your time indeed. And a good reception for the leader there from his activists behind me. Back to you, Hugh.
Raymond, thank you very much. Thanks to your guest too, Alex Salmond there, the leader of the SNP, and a sense there too of the boosting of energies as this campaign gets underway. At last, it is official. If you're just joining us, let me say, after much anticipation, Gordon Brown has called the general election for May the 6th. And a short while ago, the Prime Minister went to Buckingham Palace. He asked the Queen to dissolve Parliament. That'll happen on Monday the 12th, next Monday. And a month of campaigning now lies ahead for all of the parties. And we've seen some of the leaders today. Gordon Brown, who's already left Downing Street for some campaigning, said he was asking the British people for a clear and straightforward mandate to continue the work of economic recovery, as he put it. The Conservative leader, David Cameron, he was speaking a short while ago, said he'd be fighting this campaign on behalf of the great ignored. That was the phrase that he used. The decent people of Britain whose interests, he said, have not been safeguarded in the past 12, 13 years. Nick Clegg said that his party, the Liberal Democrats, offered a real choice to voters. Now, on this morning's events, just to remind ourselves of what happened and just to really get a sense of what's taken place, this report by Colette Macbeth.
Morning, Prime Minister. Bang on schedule, Gordon Brown made a swift exit on a journey that would mark the beginning of the end of this Parliament and the start of the official fight to see who governs in the next. Earlier, the Queen had travelled back from Windsor, where she spent Easter, touching down in time to meet the Prime Minister. His green Jaguar was followed every inch of the way, by helicopter, by camera, by the watching media. And en route, an unwelcome sight for the PM, the Conservative poster with the words "Vote for Change." The journey from Downing Street to the Palace is a short one, but today its significance was much greater. Yet the meeting here was brief, just enough time for the Prime Minister to ask the Queen to dissolve Parliament so he could call an election. And then it was back to number 10, a residence Gordon Brown has occupied for just over 1,000 days. And when he emerged, flanked by ministers, it wasn't just to announce the election date, it was to deliver a pitch, why he should be allowed to stay on.
Over the next few weeks, I will go round the country, the length and breadth of our land, and I will take to people a very straightforward and clear message. Britain is on the road to recovery, and nothing we do should put that recovery at risk.
So the big message from Labour will be that we will protect the recovery, while others will put it at risk. Although there's a buzz around Westminster now, the party leaders have already left. They've hit the campaign trail because they know that today marks a time when power shifts from Parliament to people in constituencies around the country. And with the polls so unpredictable, what is said, what isn't said in this election campaign has the power to influence the outcome in a way not seen for many years. And don't they know it? The opposition leaders wasted no time in setting out the issues, the themes that they will fight for.
Let me tell you what I think this election is all about. It's about the future of our economy. It's about the future of our society. It's about the future of our country. It's the most important general election for a generation. And it comes down to this. You don't have to put up with another 5 years of Gordon Brown.
It's a very exciting opportunity for everybody in Britain who wants fairness, who wants real change, who wants something different. This isn't the old politics of the two-horse race between the Labour and the Conservative Party. The choice, the real choice, is between the old politics of Labour and the Conservatives and something different, something new. And that's what we offer.
What we do need is champions for our communities, champions for Scotland, and that's what the SNP offers.
So the starting gun has been fired. The leaders are out of the blocks. Today they'll visit Birmingham, Watford and Kent. Tomorrow it could be a street near you. 30 days, many miles to be covered, and 3 leaders' debates. And then the votes are cast. Colette Macbeth, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, that was Colette Macbeth with a look at what's been going on today, and plenty of sunshine, plenty of colour. That journey down the Mall to Buckingham Palace, and then back here to Downing Street, where we had the official statement, and then the Prime Minister's journey up to St Pancras Station through central London. We saw David Cameron on the banks of the Thames too, and Nick Clegg talking to his workers at Lib Dem headquarters. So we're going to see lots of the kind of campaigning that we've seen this morning will be certainly seen for the days and weeks ahead. It's just turned 20 past midday. John Sopel's on the green, and he has a former party leader and a former Home Secretary with him.
Yes, so Hugh, guarantee of more sunshine and more colour now, because with me Charles Clarke and Sir Mingus Campbell. Charles Clarke, are you going to tell me now, after all that's gone over the past 2 years, that Gordon Brown is the best man to lead the country for the next 5 years?
Unquestionably. If you compare him and David Cameron, particularly on the economic themes which Gordon outlined this morning, I think it's 100% certain. I've had my criticisms, as you implied, publicly on whether Gordon should or shouldn't be the best leader of the Labour Party going into this election, but he's miles ahead of David Cameron on this key question of economic stability in our future.
Won't that sound just a little insincere, given all that you have said?
Well, it shouldn't. At the time of the bailout before the G20, I publicly praised Gordon for the role he played internationally in getting the international alliance to take the steps that were needed, which the Conservatives opposed, and I think he's been outstanding in that area. I've got other criticisms, as I've said, and which I don't resile from. But on this key economic question, Gordon has been an outstanding leader of the country and is the right person to go with as we go forward.
Sir Mingus Campbell, you led the Liberal Democrats very briefly. How do you see this campaign unfolding for your party?
Well, there's a tremendous opportunity, and as Nick Clegg is the first to acknowledge, a responsibility too, because he will be part of these debates. He'll be there on equal terms with Gordon Brown and David Cameron, and that is something that all of his predecessors would have given their eye teeth to have had. This is a great chance for Nick Clegg, and I'm certain he'll rise to the occasion.
Yes. How much do you think that the TV debates are going to play? What sort of role?
Well, one of your colleagues in the BBC said to me the other day, the debates will be the campaign and the campaign will be the debates. I think perhaps that's a little too much of a blanket judgment, but I do think they will be enormously influential, particularly the first debate, because people will tune in out of curiosity so much as anything else. And if the first debate is challenging, if questions are being asked, if the three leaders are put under the spotlight, then I think that will encourage people to watch the other debates, but also more to the point, since there are all these questions about apathy, persuade people to come out and vote on the 6th of May.
There are also debates, John, between the other leading components for each party. As we saw the Chancellor's debate the other day, there'll be the Home Secretary's debates, the Foreign Secretary's debates and so on. And I think that's why Gordon Brown emphasised his team this morning. If you contrast, we were just talking, the Home Secretary who's Alan Johnson, or Chris Huhne as the Lib Dem, compared to the utterly hopeless Chris Grayling as the Conservative Home Affairs spokesman. That will all be exposed during the campaign.
Do you think Gordon Brown emphasised the team because he thinks that actually one of the worst selling points is him?
No, I think he emphasised the team because we have got a strong team with experience. One of the key elements of what this is about is experience. You've just seen him going to travel on the train to Kent with Andrew Adonis, who's been an outstanding Transport Secretary, and he wants to highlight Andrew's skill and talent and commitment in contrast to the other parties, and I think that runs right through the Cabinet.
Just to go back to the campaign, we've got a bookmaker over here showing odds, but these odds could change very, very dramatically if in either one of the Prime Minister or the leaders' debates or any of these other important debates, someone makes a gaffe. And up to now, Mr. Grayling has been the man most likely to make a gaffe.
We've talked about the debates. We're also seeing another factor, which we've seen in other elections, but maybe more so this time. The wives. What do you make of it? I mean, I don't know whether Elspeth was wishing she had such a prominent role or thinking, thank God.
I think she's rather relieved that every day would not result in a microscopic examination of her wardrobe. Look, a wife who's particularly attractive, particularly intelligent, not going to be the person that resolves the problem of the deficit. It's the politicians, male and female, who are going to have that responsibility.
And Charles Clarke, as we look at the train from St Pancras pulling out with Gordon and Sarah Brown on it, I mean, I know your wife writes a column for the Eastern Daily Press.
Yes, she does. She wrote one the other week about this very point. Rightly so, because strong women are very important in politics, whether as candidates themselves or as the spouses of others. But judging them by their looks and appearances and all the rest of it, I think it's pretty sad myself.
You think it's a regrettable development?
I do, yes. I think judge women for what they are, who are great contributors to our society and life, not for the various appurtenances that come through.
Well, if you notice, Mrs. Clegg was particularly at pains to point out that she had a full-time job and she had 2 children, and therefore that she was concerned to make sure that she was not seen as an adjunct to her husband. I think actually it's rather patronising.
Can I just get a very quick 5-second thought? Clean campaign, dirty campaign, what do you reckon?
A rough campaign. I don't know how dirty it'll get, but I think it'll be rough. Why? Because there's all to play for.
Clean but rough. I think there'll be a strong set of arguments being made, but as Ming says, all to play for.
Charles Clarke, Sir Mingus Campbell, both of you, thank you very much. Good luck on your own relative campaign trails. From here on College Green, Hugh, back to you in Downing Street.
John, thank you very much, and thanks, of course, to your guests, Charles Clarke and Mingus Campbell. Indeed, all the guests you've had there this morning throughout this broadcast. What have we had? Well, we've had all the sights and sounds of the day. Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who emerged here in Downing Street. Well, what time was it? It was about 11:15 eventually when he came out and told the world that he decided that May the 6th was indeed the day, though that was simply confirming what we'd all been expecting. Nonetheless, we now have a precise timetable, and we now look forward to a month of intense, energetic, non-stop, hectic campaigning. It has already started, by the way, because the Prime Minister is on a train, we think on the way to Kent, and David Cameron, Nick Clegg on their travels too. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching. The coverage continues on the BBC News channel. We'll leave you with the sights and sounds of the day, the election to take place on May the 6th. Goodbye.
Morning, Prime Minister.
Feel good.
Nice night.
So there, Gordon Brown just emerging, being greeted at the door by Christopher Geitz.
I think this is a huge, huge election. I mean, it's certainly the beginning of the end for Brown.
And there is the Prime Minister looking content and happy, smile on his face.
It's about the future of our economy. It's about the future of our society. It's about the future of our country. It's the most important general election for a generation.
The future is within our grasp. It is a future fair for all. Now, all of us, let's go to it. Thank you very much.